Chapter 1832. Nietian, what I am about to say is the biggest secret of the nine-tailed chinchilla family. You must promise that you will never reveal it to anyone. The fat cat took a deep breath and said seriously, "Okay." Nietian nodded heavily. He was a person who kept his promises. He would definitely keep the secret. The fat cat nodded and finally said, "When every nine-tailed chinchilla is born, it will automatically receive an inheritance. This is a bloodline inheritance, known as the chinchilla memory inheritance." Memory inheritance? Nietian's gaze slightly tightened. He had never heard of this before. Memory inheritance is an extremely unique bloodline inheritance. The fat cat continued, "Every nine-tailed chinchilla will condense the memories of its life and store them in its bloodline. Later on, through the bloodline inheritance, this memory will be passed on to the next generation. After the nine-tailed chinchilla receives the memory inheritance, it cannot directly use the memory inheritance. It must open the seals in the memory inheritance bit by bit. There are a total of 9 memory seals. Every time the nine-tailed chinchilla grows a tail, it can open a memory seal. When all 9 tails grow, it can open all 9 seals and completely receive the chinchilla memory inheritance." At this point, the fat cat looked at Nietian and said, "I only have 5 tails now. Out of the 9 memory seals, only 5 have been opened. Therefore, I am unable to fully awaken the chinchilla memory inheritance. There are some things that I do not know." Nietian listened to the fat cat, and his eyes were dull. His expression was stiff. He did not understand very well, but the general meaning was clear. The reason why the fat cat knew so many things was because of the chinchilla memory inheritance in its body. This memory inheritance came from the accumulation of memories of its ancestors. In other words, the things that the fat cat knew were the sum of the memories of many chinchilla. Nietian had heard of all kinds of bloodline inheritances, but this was the first time he had heard of a memory inheritance. It was too magical. The world is so big. Nothing is too strange. Now, he completely understood why the fat cat was so knowledgeable. It turned out that there was a powerful memory inheritance in its body. Think about it. If the first nine-tailed chinchilla existed when the world was created, then after the fat cat regained its memory, wouldn't it know about the creation of the world? This was too frightening. When the fat cat left the glazed demon pagoda, it said, "Bringing me out is the wisest decision you've ever made in your life." Now that he thought about it, it was indeed true. "Fatty, your original body has 9 tails. Doesn't that mean he knows everything?" At this time, Nietian suddenly thought of the fat cat's original body. It was a giant 9-tailed chinchilla with 9 tails. The fat cat shook its head and said, "When the owner of the glazed demon pagoda captured Lord Original Body to be the weapon spirit, he used the glazed heart to absorb a part of Lord Original Body's chinchilla memory inheritance. Therefore, even if Lord Original Body had 9 tails, he didn't receive all of the chinchilla memory inheritance." Glazed heart. Nietian was stunned again. He suddenly remembered that when the fat cat left the glazed demon pagoda, it said that if Nietian could enter the top floor of the glazed demon pagoda and obtain the glazed heart, he could let the fat cat replace Lord Original Body and become a real 9-tailed chinchilla. He would no longer be someone's doppelganger. Perhaps the reason why the fat cat wanted to leave the glazed demon pagoda was not only because it was bored inside, but also because it wanted to become a real 9-tailed chinchilla and not be willing to be a doppelganger. Nietian secretly remembered the glazed heart. If there was a chance in the future, he would definitely help the fat cat obtain the glazed heart and let the latter become a real 9-tailed chinchilla. "Fat, what do you know about the path of slaughter?" Nietian became cold and asked. "I only know that the path of slaughter is a divine weapon, and it is a divine weapon that is not weaker than the glazed demon pagoda." The fat cat nodded and said, "It seems that the owner of the glazed demon pagoda and the owner of the path of slaughter are related. When the owner of the glazed demon pagoda died, I saw the path of slaughter. But this part of the memory is very vague. At that time, my divine sense was not strong enough. I needed to rely on Lord Original Body to stabilize it. The fat cat had not been born for a long time. There were some things that he did not remember very clearly. When he saw the patterns on the killing order, he thought of the path of slaughter, but he did not say it out loud. So strong. Nietian frowned in surprise. Nietian was well aware of how strong the glazed demon pagoda was. The glazed demon pagoda had a total of 18 levels. The 9 calamities gods had only opened 9 levels and obtained the 9 circles glaze technique. That was enough to reach the peak of the 9 major domains. Even the leader of the Fengyan Alliance, Nie Dao, and the Heavenly Network, Tian Kuei, were slightly inferior to him. The fat cat said that as long as the 9 calamities gods broke through the bottleneck of the 9 circles glaze technique, they would at least reach the half-saint level, which was enough to kill strong people like Nie Dao and Tian Kuei. A small glazed demon pagoda could make the 9 calamities gods so powerful. It was hard to imagine how powerful the path of slaughter was, even more terrifying than the glazed demon pagoda. Thinking of this, Nietian's forehead broke out in cold sweat. The scene of entering the glazed demon pagoda was still vivid in his mind. Now that he had entered the path of slaughter, he did not know what kind of test he would encounter. It seemed that it would not be so easy for him to become the king of slaughter. Nietian was now very much looking forward to seeing what the path of slaughter was like. Nietian, this time when you enter the path of slaughter, I have an ominous feeling. You must be more careful. The fat cat's expression was slightly solemn. Then he suddenly thought of something and said, I can feel that the 100 blood traces in the killing order are very powerful, even more powerful than your forbidden runes. You must be careful. Yes. Nietian nodded heavily. He had never seen the fat cat so nervous. Nietian had also sensed the blood traces in the killing order. The smell of blood was very strong, and he didn't quite understand why 100 blood traces would be left in the killing order. At this time, Nietian arrived at the entrance of the valley. The person in front of him was doing something very slowly. Nietian frowned and looked over. 2 gray-robed old men stood guard at the mouth of the gorge, both of whom were late paramount gods. Nietian speculated that these 2 old men were 2 of the 12 Lotus Masters. Nietian watched as the cultivator who was about to enter the valley took out the killing order and handed it to the gray-robed old man. The black-robed old man smiled sinisterly. He took out a black command medallion and sent a stream of black energy into the killing order. A moment later, a stream of blood energy poured out of the medallion and into the cultivator's body. The cultivator let out a muffled groan as his body began to distort. His energy weakened, and his aura became faintly discernible. Seeing this, Nietian exclaimed inwardly, Seal. He spread out his divine sense, and his expression flickered. Chapter 1833. Nietian's eyes flickered involuntarily as he stared at the cultivator. He sensed that the cultivator's body was covered by a powerful seal. The power of the seal was so terrifying that it could seep into the cultivator's blood and meridians, completely suppressing the cultivator's origin meridians and godhead. Even the cultivator's martial body was completely suppressed. That cultivator had the strength of a peak-over god, but after being sealed, his aura was weaker than an origin meridian's cultivator's. What a terrifying seal! Nietian's eyes trembled as he exclaimed inwardly. Only at this time did he understand that the 100 blood marks in the slaughter token were a powerful seal. Before every martial artist entered the path of slaughter, they had to endure the powerful seal of the slaughter command. Nietian, this is the blood mark seal. Fat Cat's voice rang out at this time. There was a trace of trembling in his voice, and his eyes were filled with terror. Fat, what kind of seal is the blood mark seal? Why is it so terrifying? Nietian forced himself to calm down and asked in a low voice. Fat Cat's face trembled slightly as he explained, the blood mark seal is a saint seal. It has an absolute suppression effect on cultivators below the sage realm. Once a cultivator is struck by the blood mark seal, not only will his origin meridians and godhead be suppressed, but his martial body, soul, divine sense, blood, meridians, and almost all other abilities will be suppressed. So terrifying. Yet Tion swallowed, his face stiffening. He already knew that seals were divided into 3 major grades: Spirit Mark, Divine Mark, and Saint Mark. Before entering the domain, the seals that Tion had encountered were all Spirit Marks. After entering the domain, he saw Divine Marks. But until now, he had never seen a Saint Mark. The Blood Mark seal he saw now was the first Saint Mark he had ever seen in his life. How could a God Realm cultivator resist a Saint Mark when it was placed on their body? The power of the Blood Mark seal exceeded Tion's expectations. Tion took a moment to calm down before asking, "Little fatty, will the blood seal suppress the fiend god nascent embryo and the origin starstone?" "Yes." The fat cat's face was gloomy as she said, "The divine demon original embryo and the primal starstone are both very heaven-defying things, but you're too weak to unleash their true power. So the divine demon original embryo and the primal starstone can't resist the suppression of the blood trace seal." Well, Tion was struck dumb. His face stiffened, and he couldn't say a word for a long time. Previously, when he participated in the 9-infant forbidden hunt, the restrictions only suppressed his Yuan Meridian and Godhead. However, the blood trace seal was completely different. It suppressed all the abilities of a martial artist. Even Cher and Lian Jiofeng's veins of 3 lives would be suppressed by the seal. Tion, I didn't expect that there would be a blood trace seal here. What happens next may be more dangerous than you think. The fat cat suddenly thought of something and said with a gloomy face, "What do you mean?" Tion was stunned. His slightly relaxed face stiffened again. "The blood trace seal will suppress your divine demon original embryo. The space of the original embryo will also be isolated, so I won't be able to communicate with you anymore." The fat cat's blue eyes flashed as she said nervously. Tion was stunned. He thought that the fat cat would definitely give him a lot of pointers after he entered the path of slaughter. Then, Tion's eyes trembled. He said, "Fat, you should enter the 9 extremities first. I haven't finished speaking yet." The fat cat frowned and shook her head. The blood trace seal greatly suppresses everything in a martial artist, including your divine sense, mental power, and even perception. Once the blood trace seal is applied, your soul and mental power will be suppressed. When that happens, you won't be able to open the 9 extremities at all. When Tion heard the fat cat's words, his eyes suddenly shrank and his whole body froze in place. He needed a strong mental power to open the 9 extremities now. If his mental power was suppressed, he wouldn't be able to open the 9 extremities. With his mental power suppressed, Tion couldn't even perceive cosmic lines. How could he open the 9 extremities? Tion, if you want to open the 9 extremities, this is your last chance. The fat cat said with trembling eyes. Tion's face darkened. Finally, he shook his head. At this time, he was under the control of the Black Lotus people. How could he open the 9 extremities? Even if Di Shi Tian and Jingchen came out, they wouldn't be a match for the Black Lotus people. In addition to the Lotus Head, there were also 2 Lotus Masters guarding the door. It was unknown how many experts were hiding in the dark. Letting Di Shi Tian and Jingchen come out at this time was simply sending them to their deaths. Tion's goal wasn't to kill the Black Lotus people, but to enter the path of slaughter and become the king of slaughter. The blood trace seal wasn't just targeting him, but everyone. Tion really didn't know what kind of effect the blood trace seal would have on him. Fat, the blood trace seal won't exist forever, right? Tion took a deep breath to calm down and asked solemnly. The blood trace seal was a Saint Seal level seal. Even the fat cat couldn't break it. If this seal existed forever, it would be terrible. It won't. The fat cat shook his head and said, although the blood trace seal is strong, it will break on its own with time. There are 100 blood traces in a massacre token. This deity guesses that 1 blood trace can be unsealed in a day. Therefore, after 100 days, the blood trace seal will disappear on its own. So that's how it is. Tion let out a long sigh of relief. His complexion turned slightly better. The fat cat then said, Tion, you have to pay attention. The blood trace seal disappears one by one, and the martial artist's strength will recover bit by bit. Therefore, the martial artists who entered the path of slaughter earlier than you have already recovered a bit of their strength. Hearing this information, Nietian couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. He immediately thought of Nangong Ju and Song's Senator. Nangong Ju and Song's son were Nietian's mortal enemies in the slaughterhouse. The two of them should have entered the path of slaughter 2 days ago. In this case, 2 of their blood trace seals should have been unsealed, and their strength should have recovered a bit. If Nietan met Nangong Ju or Song San once he entered the path of slaughter, it would be terrible. At this time, Nietian finally understood why the Black Lotus people told him that the earlier he entered the path of slaughter, the more advantages he would have. The earlier he entered the path of slaughter, the more blood trace seals would be unsealed, and the stronger he would be. At this time, it was Nietian's turn. Nietian took a deep breath and took a step forward. He passed the massacre token in his hand to the gray-robed old man. The lotus head watched from the side, with an evil smile hanging on the corner of its mouth. In its heart, it said, "Smelly brat, once you enter the path of slaughter, you will regret not dying in this deity's hands." Nietian knew that the lotus head was looking at him, but he didn't pay attention to it. The gray-robed old man glanced at Nietian. Immediately after, the black command token in his hand flashed, and a black chi flowed into the massacre token. The massacre token sensed the massacre token, and immediately, a blood-red light flowed out and directly entered Nietian's body. Chapter 1834. The instant the blood seal invaded his body, Nietian felt his body being enveloped by a terrifying force. Then, countless runes fused into his meridians and blood, instantly suppressing his strength. The process was quick and not very painful. In the blink of an eye, Nietian felt all the strength in his body being suppressed. He wanted to circulate his yuan meridians, but he found that his 9 yuan meridians were sealed by the blood runes. Even his 10th yuan meridian raw star stone was wrapped by the blood runes, unable to release the power of the stars. At this moment, Nietian finally experienced the terror of the blood runes. He had directly turned from a godly state martial artist to an ordinary person. Nietian endured the pain all over his body and tried to sense his martial body. Only then did he find that his mental power was suppressed, and his 5 senses had become sluggish. Then, he found that all the blood and meridians in his body were enveloped by the blood runes, unable to exert any strength. His martial body had also become weak. What was more terrifying was that Nietian's sword Dao strength was suppressed. Although his sword intent was still there, it had become much weaker. It was not much stronger than an ordinary swordsman with sword intent. What a terrifying sealing power! Nietian's eyes flickered as he exclaimed at his heart. The seal of the Saint Seal was too terrifying. It suppressed everything. Seeing Nietian's reaction, the corner of the lotus head's mouth twitched as she sneered inwardly. "Brat, enjoy the path of slaughter." Jian Jingyun and Gue Wushan looked at Nietian in a daze. They still did not know what had happened in Nietian's body, but they could feel that Nietian's aura had become much weaker. After a while, Nietian took a deep breath and his face regained its calmness. He stood aside and did not immediately enter the canyon. Instead, he waited for Jian Jingyun and Gue Wushan. Next, Jian Jingyun and Gue Wushan absorbed the blood runes respectively. Only then did they know what had happened to Nietian. "Are you guys all right?" Looking at Jian Jingyun and Gue Wushan, Nietian could not help smiling bitterly. What kind of seal is this? How can it be so terrifying? Gue Wushan said with an astonished expression, "This seal is a blood trace seal. It's a sage seal. It has an absolute suppressive force on the experts below the sage realm." Nietian frowned and said, in fact, he did not know much about the blood trace seal. He had only heard about it from Fat Cat. The blood traces of the Slaughter Order were formed after the death of a martial artist, but it was obviously impossible for the blood traces of those martial artists to form such a terrifying seal. Nietian guessed that the Slaughter token originally had a blood mark seal, and absorbing the blood marks was just activating the blood mark seal. "Let's go." Tian turned his head and glanced at the cultivators outside the canyon. He then turned around and walked into the canyon. Since he had already absorbed the blood trace seal, he naturally had to enter the path of massacre. Tian and the others entered the canyon and walked forward under the guidance of two black-clothed martial artists. Tian and the others passed through the canyon and arrived at a spacious place. A huge altar appeared in front of them and was floating in the air. Tian looked at the altar in the air and couldn't help but wrinkle his brows. He exposed a look of horror on his face. The huge altar was floating in the air. Dozens of 1,000-meter-tall, giant pillars were erected on the periphery of the altar. Thick iron chains were coiled around the stone pillars, and they looked like giant snakes. A huge blood-colored whirlpool was floating in the center of the giant pillars. It was rotating at an extremely fast speed and was constantly releasing a mass of dense blood energy. The entire world looked bloody in contrast to the blood-colored whirlpool, and it gave people a very gloomy feeling. The entire altar was shrouded in the color of blood, and it gave people an extremely strong sense of oppression. That blood-colored whirlpool is the path of massacre. Gue Wukon's eyes flickered, and he cried out in disbelief. It should be. Tian solemnly nodded his head. He tried to sense the aura of the blood-colored whirlpool, only to discover that his mental energy was simply insufficient. Tian and Gue Wukon had guessed correctly. That blood-colored whirlpool was the path of massacre. Tian never imagined that the path of massacre would actually be in such a state. With his current perception, he couldn't perceive the specific form of the path of massacre at all. It's so high up. How are we going to go up? Gue Wukon was stunned for a moment and asked doubtfully. The path of massacre was thousands of meters in the sky. If it was in normal times, Tian and the others could easily go up. However, they were currently suppressed by the blood trace seal and weren't much stronger than ordinary people. It was simply impossible for them to go up to such a high place. Just walk over. At this time, one of the two black-clothed martial artists spoke in a cold tone and signaled Tian and the others to walk to the bottom of the altar. Tian furrowed his brows, and without any hesitation, he directly stepped onto the altar. The instant they stepped onto the altar, the blood-colored runes on the altar seemed to have sensed something and rapidly surged. Soon after, they condensed into a blood-colored whirlpool and enveloped Tian and the others. Shit! Gue Wukon cried out in alarm when he saw that the situation wasn't good and wanted to retaliate. Don't move! Tian pulled Gue Wukon back and signaled the latter to calm down. Although Tian's mental energy was suppressed, and he couldn't activate the holographic divine runes, his instinctive perception was still stronger than ordinary people. Although those blood-colored runes seemed berserk, they didn't seem to pose any threat, and thus wouldn't harm them. Jian Jingyun's brows wrinkled, and his tensed face relaxed a lot. Compared to Gue Wukon, Jian Jingyun was clearly much calmer. Boom! At this time, the blood-colored whirlpool enveloped Tian and the others, and directly soared into the sky, rushing towards the path of massacre in the sky. In the blink of an eye, the figures of Tian and the others disappeared into the path of massacre. These three brats aren't too stupid. The two black-clothed martial artists couldn't help but sneer when they saw Tian and the others enter the path of massacre. Many martial artists who wanted to resist when they entered the path of massacre were directly swallowed by the blood-colored whirlpool. The moment they entered the path of massacre, Tian felt that the surrounding space and time had changed. Immediately after, their figures landed, and they unexpectedly arrived in a dense forest. This is the path of massacre. Gue Wukon looked at the surrounding environment and couldn't help but frown, and a puzzled look appeared on his face. Tian and Jian Jingyun also looked around, and they also had the same look of disbelief on their faces. They were surrounded by mountains and forests, and they could see a continuous mountain range in the distance. They could even hear the sound of flowing water. Everything here was actually no different from the outside world. After a moment, Tian became much colder, and he frowned and said, "Could it be an illusion? It's possible. Gui Wukan nodded solemnly and said, "We didn't see those who entered before us. They should have also fallen into an illusion." Nie Tian's eyes narrowed, and a sparkling and translucent stone appeared in his hand. It was the true G crystal. The true G crystal could ignore any illusion, and this was something that Nie Tian had obtained from the Duanmu Lu siblings back in the 3,000 Small Worlds. Nie Tian looked at the true G crystal in his hand, and the surrounding scenery reflected in the crystal didn't change at all. Chapter 1835. When Nie Tian confirmed that the world he was in wasn't an illusion, his expression became even more complicated. He had imagined that the inner world of the Path of Slaughter might be a blood-red world of slaughter, or a world with a dense blood aura. However, he had never imagined that the inner world of the Path of Slaughter would be an ordinary world. It's strange that this isn't an illusion. Gui Wukan frowned and said with a puzzled expression, "In the eyes of the Black Lotus people, the Path of Slaughter is an extremely terrifying place. Why can't I feel any danger? Everything here is indeed very strange." At this time, Jian Jingyun, who had been silent all this time, also opened his mouth. He was also puzzled. Nie Tian took a deep breath and said indifferently, "Let's not care about that for now. Let's look around and see if we can find anyone else." He didn't know what was in the Path of Slaughter, nor did he know how to get out of it. However, he had his own plans. Nie Tian planned to find a safe place to hide. At the very least, he had to unseal a few of the blood traces in his body and recover his strength before thinking about other things. Currently, Nie Tian's strength was being suppressed by the blood traces. This made him feel very insecure, especially now that they were facing a completely unfamiliar world. Next, Nie Tian's group of 3 walked for a few thousand meters, but they didn't find anything. After a short while, the 3 arrived at a valley. "Let's rest in this valley for a while." Nie Tian pointed at the valley in front of them. "Okay." Jian Jingyun and Gui Wukan agreed, and the 3 directly entered the valley. The valley wasn't big, only a few dozen meters in radius. There weren't any traces of beasts, so it was a good place to rest. Because the 3 of them had blood traces in their bodies, they couldn't cultivate even if they wanted to. They could only quietly wait for the seals to unseal themselves. "Sigh, the blood traces are too powerful. My strength is completely suppressed." Gui Wukan sighed and said helplessly. At this time, Gui Wukan came to the side of a small tree. His eyes flickered, and he immediately punched it. Bang! A muffled sound rang out as a fist mark was left on the small tree. Gui Wukan's fist also started to bleed. "Fuck! This daddy has become a cripple." Gui Wuchan couldn't help but let out a strange cry as he looked at the bloodstains on his fist. He was a mighty peak over god. A single punch from him was enough to destroy an entire mountain range. Yet he could not even knock down a tree as thick as a bowl. If he was not trash, what was he? "Gui Wuchan, are you all right?" Jian Jingyun walked over and asked with a frown. "It's nothing." Gui Wukan shook his head, a helpless look on his face. Nie Tian glanced at Gui Wukan and couldn't help but smile. He said, "The bloodmark seal is indeed powerful, but you're still not completely crippled. At least you still have the strength of 1,000 pounds under your punch." Although Gui Wuchan's punch did not shatter the small tree, it had at the very least left a mark on it. The force behind it was still at least 1,000 pounds. "Jian Jingyun, why don't you try and see how much strength you have left?" Gui Wukan laughed bitterly as he looked at Jian Jingyun and instigated. Jian Jingyun hesitated for a moment, but he still walked to the side of the small tree. He took a deep breath and ferociously punched. Bang! Another muffled sound rang out. A fist mark appeared on the tree trunk. It was almost the same as the one left by Gui Wukan. Jian Jingyun and Gui Wukan's strength was almost the same. After being suppressed by the bloodmark seal, there was not much of a difference in their strength. Gui Wukan glanced at Jian Jingyun and chuckled. He felt much better in his heart. At this time, Jian Jingyun and Gui Wukan looked at Nie Tian at the same time. They did not say anything and only smiled. "All right, I'll try as well." Tian shrugged his shoulders and smiled helplessly. He then walked to the side of the small tree. Jian Jingyun and Gue Wukan looked at Tian curiously. They were very curious about how much strength Tian had left under the suppression of the bloodmark seal. Tian looked at the two fist marks on the tree trunk. The corner of his mouth twitched slightly. He then punched. Bang! A muffled sound rang out. The small tree shook a little. A fist mark appeared on the tree trunk. It was clearly deeper than the previous two fist marks. Jian Jingyun and Gue Wukan walked over to take a look. They looked at each other in surprise. The strength of Tian's fist was obviously much stronger than theirs. Crack! At this time, the small tree suddenly shook. A crisp sound rang out. The entire tree trunk broke and fell to the side. This, Jian Jingyun and Gue Wuchan sucked in a mouthful of cold air. Their faces were filled with shock, and they were speechless. Tian looked at them and smiled. He said, "Just now, the two of you punched each other. The small tree couldn't take it anymore. I was just lucky." Jian Jingyun and Gue Wukan looked at Tian in shock. They knew that Tian was comforting them. The strength that Tian displayed was several times stronger than theirs. Although the blood seal that Tian and the other two had endured was the same, Tian's martial body was stronger than Jian Jingyun and Gue Wukan's. Even if he was suppressed by the blood seal, he was still stronger than ordinary people. Jian Jingyun and Gue Wukan's strength was around 1,000 jin. Tian's strength was at least 5,000 jin. What Jian Jingyun and Gue Wukan didn't know was that Tian didn't use his full strength in the punch just now. It was just a casual punch because he didn't want to hurt them. Unfortunately, Tian's casual punch still made Jian Jingyun and Gue Wukan feel a deep impact. Tian explained the blood seal to Jian Jingyun and Gue Wukan. He told them that after 100 days, the blood seal would automatically be undone. Knowing that the seal would automatically be undone, Jian Jingyun and Gue Wukan felt relieved. In the following time, Tian and the other two no longer spoke. They stayed in the valley and quietly waited for the first blood seal to be undone. In the blink of an eye, half a day had passed. Tian faintly felt that the blood seal within his body was loosening. It seemed that the first blood seal was about to be undone. He suppressed the excitement in his heart and quietly waited. However, at this time, Tian heard a low roar coming from outside the valley. He couldn't help but tense up. Oh no! Tian's complexion changed. He couldn't help but cry out in his heart. Their current strength was at most equivalent to a 9th-level origin vein martial artist. If a mythological beast came at this time, it would simply be a devastating disaster. Even if it wasn't a mythological beast, but a high-level spirit beast, Tian and the others wouldn't have the slightest strength to resist. With their current strength, they could at most deal with a slightly weaker second-rank spirit beast. Tian, what's wrong? Jian Jingyun saw that Tian's complexion wasn't right. He walked over and asked, "Something is coming towards the valley." Tian's eyes flickered as he said in a low voice. Jian Jingyun wrinkled his brows and immediately became nervous. Gue Wukan also felt that something was wrong. He cautiously came to the side of Tian and Jian Jingyun. Gradually, the low roar became louder and louder. It was rapidly approaching Tian and the others. Tian and the other two were tensed up. Their hearts were in their throats. Roar! In the next moment, a ruthless roar resounded. A figure descended from the sky and appeared at the entrance of the valley. Chapter 1836. Roar! Outside the valley, a deep roar echoed out like a muffled thunder, causing Tian and the others to tremble. "It's a wolf." Tian stared at the scarlet figure outside the valley. His eyes narrowed slightly, and he almost cried out in surprise. "What a big wolf!" Jian Jingyun and Gue Wuxian looked at each other and cried out in surprise. This scarlet wolf was 5 to 6 meters long, and its entire body was scarlet like blood. Even its eyes were dark red, surging with a terrifying, bloodthirsty, killing intent. "What rank is this fellow?" Gue Wuxian gulped and asked carefully in a low voice. His voice was actually trembling a little. It should be a rank 1 spirit beast, Jian Jingyun replied. Although he looked calm on the surface, his heart was beating wildly. Judging from its size and aura, this scarlet wolf should not be of a high rank. It should only be a rank 1 spirit beast. Jian Jingyun and Gue Wushan were both peak overgod martial artists. Facing a rank 1 spirit beast at this moment, they could feel a genuine killing intent. Their strength was suppressed by the blood trace seal, so their current battle prowess was equivalent to a weaker origin meridian martial artist. Facing a rank 1 spirit beast was really a bit of stretch. Nye Tian. At this moment, Gue Wushan could not help but look at Nye Tian. As soon as he called out the latter's name, his expression stiffened. Only Jian Jingyun sensed something and suddenly turned to look. However, just like Gue Wushan, he was also stunned. They saw Nye Tian walking over step by step. He was actually slowly approaching the Scarlet Wolf. What was Nye Tian trying to do? Jian Jingyun and Gue Wushan were confused and frightened. They did not know what Nye Tian was trying to do. Nye Tian approached the Scarlet Wolf bit by bit. The wolf's dark red eyes stared at Nye Tian, but it did not attack. "Little guy, you have to be good and listen to me," Nye Tian muttered as he walked, his eyes fixed on the giant crimson wolf. "Nye Tian wants to tame this giant wolf." Jian Jingyun suddenly reacted. His expression changed, and he almost cried out in fear. His guess was right. Nye Tian wanted to tame the giant red wolf. Although Nye Tian's strength was completely suppressed, he could still release the power of the stars for a while. The eye of the starry sky could exert a little of its power, and coupled with his spiritual power, he should be able to tame a rank 1 spirit beast. Nye Tian's mental strength had been greatly suppressed, but it was still around level 30, far stronger than ordinary spirit realm practitioners. He didn't want to fight the giant crimson wolf head-on. Taming the latter would undoubtedly be the best way to deal with it. The crimson wolf stared at Nye Tian, appearing very calm and even somewhat gentle. Nye Tian was delighted. He was confident that he could tame the giant scarlet wolf. Woo! However, right at this moment, a low wolf howl suddenly resounded like a clap of thunder, startling the huge crimson wolf awake. Roar! The huge crimson wolf sensed it and growled. Its eyes became ruthless as it stared at Nye Tian and slammed its claws. Everything happened in an instant. Even if Nye Tian's reaction was fast, he was still a step too late. Swoosh! The wolf's claws slashed through the air, and Nye Tian's figure retreated a few meters. Several deep wounds were left on his chest, revealing his bones. Blood immediately spurted out. Nye Tian, Jian Jingyun, and Gue Wushan exclaimed in unison when they saw this. They quickly stepped forward and tried to pull Nye Tian back. Damn it! Nye Tian let out a bellow. Ignoring the wounds on his body, his eyes grew grim as killing intent surged out of them. Then he stamped his feet against the ground and leaped high into the air, landing directly on the huge wolf's head. Jian Jingyun and Gue Wushan were stunned again. Nye Tian's ferocity was beyond their expectations. Bastard, go to hell! Nye Tian's figure landed and his eyes darkened. He fiercely punched the back of the giant crimson wolf's head. Puff! Suddenly, the sound of flesh being penetrated was heard. Nye Tian's punch directly smashed the back of the giant crimson wolf's head. Blood and brain matter splattered all over his body. The giant crimson wolf didn't even have the time to let out a final scream. Its huge body swayed a few times and fell powerlessly to the ground, no longer moving. This, Jian Jingyun and Gue Wushan couldn't help but gasp when they saw this scene. Nye Tian was really ferocious. In a situation where his strength was absolutely suppressed, he could still kill a rank 1 spiritual beast with one punch. Nye Tian killed the giant crimson wolf and jumped down. He immediately looked at Jian Jingyun and Gue Wushan and shouted, "Quickly leave this place." After saying that, Nye Tian's figure moved and directly ran away. Jian Jingyun and Gue Wushan didn't know what happened, but they subconsciously believed in Nye Tian and immediately followed. Nye Tian ran wildly in front, but the wounds on his body couldn't stop bleeding. Blood flowed intermittently on the ground. His strength was suppressed, and he couldn't use the power in his body. With such a serious injury, it would be difficult for the wounds to heal in a short period of time. After running wildly for a few kilometers, Nietion's figure suddenly stopped and asked Jian Jingyun and Gue Wushan, "Do you have a fire?" Fire? Jian Jingyun and Gue Wushan were stunned and couldn't react in time. Fire. I need to treat my wounds. Nietion nodded and said, "The bloody smell of the wounds is too heavy. If you don't treat it, the wolf pack will catch up very quickly." Wolf pack? Jian Jingyun and Gue Wushan were stunned again. They didn't know where the wolf pack Nietion was talking about was. When I was trying to tame the giant wolf, I was about to succeed, but a wolf howl stopped me. I guess that was the low howl of the Wolf King. Nietion simply explained, then looked at Jian Jingyun and said, "I need to treat my wounds now." Only now did Jian Jingyun completely understand. He immediately took out a flint and lit a pile of fire. "Give me the red-hot wood." Nietion's face was gloomy as he clenched his teeth and said. Jian Jingyun, of course, knew what Nietion wanted to do. He stretched out his hand and handed a red-hot wooden stick to Nietion's hand. Nietion looked at the fire stick in his hand with a firm expression and firm eyes. He no longer hesitated and directly placed the red-hot wooden stick on the wound on his chest. Sizzle. The air was filled with black smoke and an ear-piercing sound. There was the smell of meat being cooked in the air. In an instant, intense pain spread throughout his body. Nietion's forehead was full of sweat, but he didn't make any sound. Jian Jingyun and Gue Wushan were watching from the side. Their eyes were trembling. Nietion was really too fierce. This kind of pain wasn't something an ordinary person could bear. Nietion felt that the blood had stopped flowing. He threw away the fire stick and glanced at the wound on his chest. He smiled and said, "The scar is a bit ugly, but after I recover my strength, the wound will be healed." Nietion's strength was suppressed, and his martial body was also suppressed. He had a high-grade healing medicine on him, but unfortunately, he couldn't use it because his body couldn't bear such a powerful medicine. Nietion was only trying to stop the bleeding. After he recovered his strength, the wound on his body would be healed. "Let's leave this place." Nietion looked behind him. He was worried that the wolf pack would chase after him, so he turned around and prepared to leave. However, at this moment, a deep sneer rang out from the dense forest in the distance. Chapter 1837. "It's you." Nietion suddenly turned around and frowned when he saw Song's son in the distance. He never expected that Song's son would appear at this time. "Oh no, it's this guy." Jian Jingyun and Gue Wushan also recognized Song. Senator, their expressions suddenly changed and revealed serious fear. Back in the slaughtering field, Nietion killed Song Sen's brother, Song Lin. The two of them had a deep hatred that would not rest until one of them was dead. Song's son wanted to kill Nietion back in the slaughtering field, but unfortunately, he was stopped by the Lotus Head. Before Song's son left, he said that he would definitely kill Nietion to avenge his brother. Nietion and the others had come to the slaughtering field for less than a day, but they actually encountered Song's senator. They were really unlucky. "I really didn't expect to meet you here." Nietion became cold and coldly smiled. He took a step forward and stood in front of Jian Jingyun and Gue Wushan. Although Nietion was injured, his battle strength was still much stronger than Jian Jingyun and Gue Wushan. Song's son entered the slaughtering field 2 days earlier than Nietion and the others. At this time, 2 of the blood-marked seals in his body had been unsealed. His strength had recovered to at least the origin spirit realm or even the manifestation realm. A casual attack from him was enough to instantly kill Jian Jingyun and Gue Wushan. "Stinking brat, you kill my brother. We won't rest until one of us is dead." Song's son coldly said with a cold smile on his lips, "I've been looking for you for 2 days. I was just worried that you wouldn't appear. I didn't expect you to suddenly appear. It seems that the heavens have eyes." After saying that, Song's son coldly laughed. His eyes were surging with a heavy, killing intent. He saw that Nietion was injured, but he was still a little afraid. He didn't understand the blood-marked seals, so he didn't know the level of Nietion's current strength. "You want to kill me with just you?" Tian felt that Song Sun was very afraid. He couldn't help but coldly laugh. Your strength is suppressed by a powerful seal. How much can you use now? You want to kill me with this bit of strength? Dream on. Jian Jingyun and Gue Wushan were stunned for a moment, but they immediately understood that Tian was bluffing to scare Song's senator. Song's son frowned as he stared at Tian with flickering eyes. The dread in his eyes grew stronger. He couldn't sense Tian's strength at all, so he couldn't be sure. Most importantly, in the slaughtering field, Tian had an abnormal strength that left an extremely shocking impression on Senator. Most importantly, Tian's abnormal strength left an extremely shocking impression on Senator Song's son. Had no idea that the seals inside of them were at the Saint Seal level. No matter how freakishly strong Tian was, he wouldn't be able to resist them. Tian guessed that if he were to fight Song's son head-on now, he would definitely suffer a great loss. Therefore, he wanted to delay until the first blood vein seal was unsealed. As long as the first blood vein seal was unsealed, Tian had the confidence to battle Song's son. Song's son was puzzled. He couldn't figure out Tian's strength, so he didn't dare to make a move. He had seen with his own eyes how Tian had killed his opponents more than once in desperate situations. You don't have the guts to do it. Seeing that Song's son didn't dare to make a move, Tian sneered and provoked. If you don't have the guts, then scram. Bastard you. Song Sen's face darkened, and he didn't dare to move. The more arrogant Tian was, the more afraid he was. Looking at the embarrassed expression on Song Sen's face, Gue Wukong sneered and said, "You're really a coward. If you want to make a move, then make a move. If you don't, then scram. Don't block the way." Song Sen's expression became even more unsightly. For a moment, he was in a dilemma. He stared at Tian with a heavy gaze. Feeling the murderous aura coming from the latter, he secretly calculated in his heart. This kid's strength is strange and unpredictable. I'm afraid it won't be easy for me to kill him. Why don't I wait for the seal in my body to be unsealed a little more and my strength to recover more before I kill him? Anyway, there's still a lot of time in the future. There's no hurry. Thinking so, Song Sen's figure couldn't help but start to retreat, unexpectedly making way for Tian and the others. Tian's brows twitched, appearing to be both provocative and surprised. He also didn't expect that this Song San would be so timid. On the surface, he looked very intimidating, but who knew that when he really made a move, he was actually so cowardly. Song San was also frightened by Tian. When he looked at Tian, the scene of Tian killing his opponent in a desperate situation kept appearing in his mind. "Let's go." Tianling sneered and wanted to leave. Unfortunately, at this time, a strange change occurred. Whoosh! Just as Tian took a step forward, he sensed a fierce aura coming at him from the void. He came to an abrupt stop. In the next moment, a huge boulder 5 meters in front of him was hit by a fierce aura and shattered on the spot. Spear intent. Tian looked at the shattered rocks on the ground and frowned. Then, he raised his head and looked into the depths of the forest. He saw a figure slowly walking out. When he saw the face of the figure clearly, his face couldn't help but sink, and his heart cursed. Nangongju, Jian Jingyun, and Gue Wuchan also looked at the figure and shouted the name at the same time. Not only did their faces sink, but they also revealed a look of shock. Who would have thought that Nangongju would actually appear at this time? He had just dealt with Song's son, and before he even took a step, someone even more difficult to deal with than Song's son appeared. "Why? Seeing me appear, you guys are not happy?" Nangongju walked over step by step. His whole body was surging with a strong aura, like a long spear, cold and murderous. Tian looked at Nangongju, shook his head, and smiled bitterly. Nangongju's sudden appearance was indeed out of his expectation. Nangongju was not only stronger, but also more cunning. He was definitely not like Song San, who could be dealt with a few threatening words. "It's him!" Song San saw Nangongju and his eyes lit up. That day in the slaughtering field, he saw the battle between Tian and Nangongju clearly. He reckoned that Nangongju wanted to kill Tian more than he did. Stinking brat. I said that I would wait for you at the path of slaughtering. Nangongju stopped and stared at Nietian with murderous eyes and said, You really didn't disappoint me. You really delivered yourself to me. Nietian looked at Nangongju and seemed to have sensed something. The corner of his mouth twitched, and he smiled faintly. Nangongju, do you really think you can kill me? Nangongju was stunned for a moment, and then asked back, Do you think you can still escape? Nietian's expression changed slightly, and he smiled. Is there a need for me to escape? Nangongju frowned. Just as he was about to speak, he sensed something, and his expression suddenly changed. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. In the next moment, from the dense forest, countless red figures scuttled out, and instantly surrounded Nietian and the others. This is... Songsin finally reacted, and his face suddenly changed, becoming as pale as paper. Nietian looked at the huge red wolves around him, and the corner of his mouth raised slightly. He thought, These huge wolves came at the right time. The appearance of the wolf pack at this time was not bad news for Nietian and the others, but good news. These huge red wolves were violent and bloodthirsty, and they wouldn't show mercy to anyone. Just then, Nietian's expression suddenly changed, and then he revealed a surprised expression. Chapter 1838. Nietian suddenly felt the blood tray seal in his body being unsealed. His face revealed a hint of surprise, and the aura around his body became much sharper. At the same time, Jian Jingyun and Gue Wuchan also laughed strangely. It was obvious that the blood tray seal in their bodies were unsealed as well. Nangongju felt that Nietian's aura had become stronger and couldn't help but be startled for a moment. Then, his face revealed a fierce expression, and he said in a deep voice, Even if you recover a little bit of your strength, it won't change your fate of death. Nangongju was a fierce, overbearing, and extremely arrogant person. Even if he was facing a pack of wolves, and Nietian and the other two recovered their strength, he still didn't want to retreat. He was confident that he could definitely kill Nietian and the other two. Roar! At this moment, a giant red wolf couldn't hold back anymore. It growled and leaped into the air like a ball of fire, directly pouncing towards Song Sr., courting death. Seeing this, Song Sun was not afraid. He growled and struck out with his palm. A violent palm force suddenly burst out, and a muffled sound was heard in the air. The giant wolf was killed on the spot. Song Sun had unsealed 2 of the blood traces in his body, and his strength was equivalent to that of a peak origin spirit realm martial practitioner. Even if it was a powerful rank 2 spirit beast, he would not be afraid. Killing a mere rank 1 spirit beast was naturally not a problem for him. Roar! 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 Almost at the same time, more than a dozen crimson wolves leaped into the air and pounced on Nietian and the others. Be careful! Nietian growled and directly punched out. A fist appeared in the air and directly smashed half of a giant wolf's head. The scene was bloody. Jian Jingyun and Gue Wuchan also attacked at the same time, and each of them killed a giant wolf. Nietian and the other two's blood tray seal were unsealed, and their strength recovered to peak origin meridian. They could already slowly circulate their Yuan meridian, and their battle strength had a qualitative leap. This kind of instantaneous increase in strength made them feel very happy. Damn bastard, how dare you ruin my plans? Courting death. On the other side, Nangongju let out a furious roar and stabbed out with his spear. Layers upon layers of spear shadows appeared in the air and actually killed more than 10 huge wolves. Among the people present, Nangongju was the first to enter the path of slaughter. 3 of the blood marks in his body had been unsealed, and his strength was already equivalent to the 5th level of the manifestation realm. So strong. When other people saw Nangongju's incomparably valiant, they couldn't help but exclaim. Nietian looked at Nangongju and inhaled a breath of cold air. Luckily, the wolf pack appeared in time. If he had to fight with Nangongju alone, he would probably be in deep trouble. The difference between Nietian and Nangongju was actually just 2 bloodmark seals. However, The difference between these two bloodmark seals was very obvious in the early stages. The further they progressed, the smaller the difference would be. Therefore, it would be best for Nie Tian to avoid a direct confrontation with Nangongju. More than 10 huge wolves were instantly killed. Not only did it not cause the wolf pack to retreat, it instead made them even more frenzied. Immediately, more huge wolves pounced over ferociously. Like balls of flames, they smashed towards Nie Tian and the others. Jian Jingyun, Gue Wuchan, let's find a chance to leave. As Nie Tian dealt with the attacks of the huge wolves, he transmitted his voice over. The wolf pack had already gone berserk. This was a good chance for Nie Tian and the others to take advantage of to leave. The three of them had their backs against each other and formed a triangular formation. They retreated as they fought, slowly pulling away from Nangongju and Song Sr. Wanna run? When Nangongju saw that Nie Tian wanted to escape, his expression darkened. With a furious roar, he struck out a tyrannical spear. The spear's shadow was like a dragon as it smashed over. Several scarlet huge wolves were instantly killed. Nangongju stomped on the ground, and his figure leaped high into the air. With a downward thrust, a terrifying spear shadow suddenly descended and smashed towards Nie Tian. Nie Tian frowned. He stomped on the ground fiercely and punched out. A fist shadow whizzed out and faced the spear shadow in the air. Bang! The spear shadow and the fist shadow collided, and a muffled sound could be heard in the air. After that, the spear shadow directly descended and heavily smashed onto Nie Tian's body. Nie Tian groaned, and his figure landed heavily on the ground. The wound on his chest actually split open and blood spurted out violently. Nie Tian. When Jian Jingyun and Gue Wuchan saw that Nie Tian was injured, they shouted at the same time and supported Nie Tian. I'm fine. Nie Tian spat out a mouthful of black blood, indicating that he was fine. The reason why he fought with Nangongju just now was to protect Jian Jingyun and Gue Wuchan. The latter two's martial body was too weak. If they were hit by Nangongju's spear shadow, they would definitely die. Although Nie Tian was injured, his martial body was strong. His life was not in danger after taking a direct hit from Nangongju. Stinking brat, looks like I've underestimated you. When Nangongju's spear fell, he saw that Nie Tian was actually still alive. His eyes turned cold, and his killing intent became even stronger. Roar, roar, roar. At this time, another dozen of giant red wolves leaped up and pounced towards Nangongju at the same time. Their sharp claws shone coldly in the air. Unfortunately, these giant red wolves were too weak. They could not pose any threat to Nangongju at all. At most, they could only hold him back. Reckless beasts, get out of my way. Nangongju roared angrily. His spear slashed across the sky. Immediately, a wave of spear intent appeared. Everywhere it passed, blood splattered everywhere. Dozens of giant red wolves died on the spot. They didn't even have the chance to scream in pain. The wolf pack was intimidated by Nangongju's might. They didn't dare to move forward anymore and started to slowly retreat. These giant red wolves were only rank 1 spirit beasts after all. Even the Wolf King's strength was only at the level of a rank 2 spirit beast. If the wolf pack continued to fight, they would probably be killed by Nangongju alone. Stinking brat. Let's see who can save you this time. After forcing the wolf pack to retreat, Nangongju stared coldly at Nie Tian. He walked towards him step by step. With every step he took, the killing intent on his body became denser. Jian Jingyun and Gue Wuchan felt Nangongju's killing intent, and their faces were filled with fear. With the two of them, they couldn't even block a single spear from Nangongju. You guys back off. Nie Tian looked at Nangongju, and his face slowly became gloomy. However, his eyes became firm. He signaled Jian Jingyun and Gue Wuchan to retreat to one side. Jian Jingyun and Gue Wuchan were stunned for a moment. They looked at each other and immediately retreated. They felt that Nie Tian seemed to want to do something. They believed in Nie Tian. Song Sen's eyes lit up as he watched from the side. He really wanted to kill Nie Tian with his own hands. However, The current him didn't seem to have the strength to do so. However, he was very happy to see Nietian die with his own eyes. At this moment, Song Sun was very surprised. He noticed that when Nietian was facing Nangongju, he didn't have the slightest bit of fear. Instead, he was filled with fighting intent. He couldn't imagine how Nietian could be so calm when facing an opponent that was far stronger than him. If it was Song Sun, facing an expert like Nangongju, he would have long since knelt on the ground and begged for mercy with snot and tears. "Brat, do you still want to fight me?" When Nangongju saw that Nietian didn't have the slightest intention to resist, he couldn't help but let out a cold laugh and said, "My current strength is equivalent to a 5th-level manifestation realm martial artist, and you are at most a peak origin vein realm martial artist. With a difference of 2 realms, what right do you have to fight me?" Chapter 1839. Nietian stared at Nangongju with a gloomy expression. His pair of cold eyes were like a cold pool at the bottom of a well, without the slightest ripple, but it made one feel a bone-chilling coldness. Nangongju frowned. He could feel a strange aura slowly rising from Nietian's body. However, he did not take it to heart. He did not believe that Nietian, who was so weak and heavily injured, could do anything. "Stinking brat, you are indeed a rare, monstrous genius. Unfortunately, your opponent is me, Nangongju." Nangongju's aura surged as he said loudly, "Today, I will let you know that in front of me, Nangongju, no matter how monstrous a genius is, they are all trash." Jian Jingyun and Gue Wutsan's eyes trembled. Nangongju's words made them feel disgusted. Nangongju had already lived for tens of thousands of years, but how old was Nietian? Nangongju was still bragging about himself in such a situation. How shameless. On the other side, Song Sen's focus was different. His eyes lit up, and at the same time, he was secretly accumulating his strength. He had an ominous premonition that Nietian might still have a chance to turn the tables. Just in case, Song Sun had already made preparations to attack. As long as there was any abnormality, he would secretly launch a sneak attack. In the end, Nietian, "Stinking brat, die for me." Nangongju roared crazily as his figure suddenly leaped up. His spear streaked across the air, and immediately a terrifying spear image appeared. It was incomparably sharp, as if it could tear through everything, and mercilessly slashed towards Nietian. Nietian stood on the spot, but his eyes were closed. He did not pay attention to Nangongju's attack at all. At this moment, his body released a dripping blood chi, and the surrounding heaven and earth changed. Space seemed to have collapsed, tilting towards Nietian. Endless heaven and earth spirit energy continuously gathered on Nietian's body. Burning blood chi, borrowing the power of heaven and earth. Jian Jingyun and Gue Wutsan reacted at the same time and cried out in alarm. They finally knew what Nietian was doing. Nietian was burning his own blood chi as the price, borrowing the power of heaven and earth to raise his entire body's aura. This method was simply heaven-defying. Boom! In the next moment, the terrifying spear shadow pressed down. It was only a few meters away from Nietian, and Nietian was about to be killed. Flowing human imprint, kill. At this moment, Nietian's closed eyes suddenly opened, the corner of his mouth twitched, and then he suddenly slapped out with his palm. The power of heaven and earth changed in an instant, and all of them gathered on Nietian's palm. The space suddenly tightened, and a terrifying palm shadow appeared. It was like a flood dragon and directly rushed out. Boom! In the next moment, the spear shadow and the palm shadow collided in the air. The space trembled, and then a terrifying power spread in all directions, spreading in the space. The eyes of Jian Jingyun and the rest trembled. They never thought that the battle between Nietian and Nangongju would be so terrifying. Bang! Then a muffled sound was heard, and a figure flew out in the air, smashing heavily into a huge tree. The tree trunk was smashed into pieces. "It's Nangongju." Jian Jingyun and Gue Wuzan cried out in shock as they looked at the scene in front of them in disbelief. The figure that was sent flying was actually Nan Gongjue. How is this possible? On the other side, Song's son also frowned. His expression was uncertain, and he even forgot to launch a sneak attack. Who would have thought that such a powerful Nan Gongjue would be sent flying when facing Nietian head-on? Nan Gongjue's figure landed, and he barely managed to stand. His eyes trembled, and just as he opened his mouth to speak, he spat out a mouthful of dirty blood. Nan Gongjue, what else do you want to say? Nietian stood on the spot. Cold spoke, but his face was as pale as paper. Nietian forcefully activated the flowing human imprint of the war god's 3 seals just now, and his blood chi was severely depleted. It was because his martial body was suppressed by the power of heaven and earth, and he was also severely injured. He had no choice but to use the flowing human imprint. This was a method of fighting that would cause both sides to suffer losses. Nan Gongjue was heavily injured, and Nietian was also heavily injured. However, on the surface, Nietian had the absolute advantage. After all, he was already in a desperate situation just now. It was already a miracle that he could counterattack. How can your strength be so strange? Nan Gongjue's eyes trembled as he spoke in a low voice with a vicious expression on his face. He really couldn't understand how Nietian, who clearly didn't have the strength to fight back, could defeat him in an instant. Nan Gongjue, you asked me why I should fight with you. Nietianling sneered and said, I'll tell you now, I can defeat you with my own strength. You? Nan Gongjue's face darkened, and his body trembled as he spat out another mouthful of dirty blood. Nietian looked at Nan Gongjue with a heavy gaze. The killing intent in his eyes was very strong, but he didn't attack again. Brat, we will meet again. Nan Gongjue wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and turned to leave. Jian Jingyun and Gue Wuzan looked at each other and wanted to chase after him, but they were stopped by Nietian. The two of them looked at Nietian with a puzzled expression. Nan Gongjue was already heavily injured. Why didn't he just kill him? A skinny camel is still bigger than a horse. Nietian looked at Nan Gongjue's back and said indifferently, although Nan Gongjue is injured, he is still a dangerous person. The two of you won't be able to kill him. Jian Jingyun and Gue Wuzan were embarrassed. The two of them were simply too weak. If they chased after him, they might really be killed by Nan Gongjue. Song's son, Nan Gongjue has already left. Are you still not going to scram? At this moment, Nietian looked at Song's son and said coldly. Song Sen's eyes flickered, and his eyes kept rolling. He suddenly chuckled and said, I'm very curious. Why did you let Nan Gongjue leave? Nietian's face darkened, and his eyes couldn't help but flicker. Looks like you've reached your limit. Song Sen's small eyes rolled, and he actually took a step forward. His entire body released a killing intent as he said, If I'm not wrong, the current you is just an empty shell. You can only stand, but you don't have any fighting strength, right? Nietian frowned, and a trace of blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. He had held on until now, but he didn't expect Song's son to see through him. The reason why Nietian let Nan Gongjue leave was not because he didn't want to kill him, but because he had reached his limit. His injuries were actually more serious than Nan Gongjue's, because he had been severely injured by a giant red wolf before. Nietian originally thought that with Song Sen's courage, he would definitely run away in fear after Nan Gongjue left. He didn't expect that Song Sen's observation skills were not weak, even though he didn't have guts. Since he had been seen through, there was no need for Nietian to continue holding on. He spat out a mouthful of blood, his body swayed slightly, and he almost fell. Nietian, Jian Jingyun, and Gue Wuzan took a step forward at the same time and supported Nietian. The two of them couldn't tell that Nietian was forcing himself out. Only now did they know why Nietian let Nan Gongjue leave. Chapter 1840. Song's son could see that Nietian had reached his limit and no longer had the strength to fight. However, he still didn't dare to be careless. He laughed and said, Boy, I'll give you a choice. Kill yourself in front of me, and I'll let your 2 friends go. How about it? Song Sun was still a coward. Even though he could see that Nie Tian was holding on, he still didn't dare to act rashly. He was still afraid that Nie Tian would use another heaven-defying killing move. He regretted not helping out when Nie Tian and Nangong Ju were fighting. "You want me to kill myself?" Nie Tian laughed. His eyes were fixed on Song Sun as he said in a clear voice, "Do you think a rat like you is qualified to make me commit suicide? Ridiculous." "You." Song Sun's face darkened after being called coward. He was speechless. However, his expression changed, and he said, "Brat, don't force me to act. If I do, you won't be the only one who will die. Don't tell me you have the heart to see your two friends die with you?" Humph. Nie Tian looked at Song Sun and couldn't help but laugh. This guy didn't have any guts, but he was good at threatening people. He actually used Jian Jingyun and Gue Wushan to threaten Nie Tian. What are you laughing at?" Song Sun was flustered by Nie Tian's laughter, and his voice was trembling. "I'm laughing because you're ridiculous." Nie Tian raised the corner of his mouth and said with disdain, "People like you don't have any friends. You don't even know what friends are. If I kill myself today, Jian Jingyun and Gue Wushan will be in an unjust situation. I want to tell you that even if they die, they won't take a step back." "That's right." Jian Jingyun and Gue Wushan's expression changed. They took a step forward and said, "Fighting for friends, what's there to fear? You bunch of lunatics." Song Sun's eyes flashed, and his voice became sharp. At the same time, the killing intent in his eyes became much stronger. At this moment, he was even more certain that Nie Tian no longer had the strength to fight back. Song Sun's gaze locked onto Jian Jingyun and Gue Wuchan as he spoke in a heavy tone. "Two idiots. Since you want to die, then I'll fulfill your wish." With that, Song Sun finally made his move. Boom! Song Sun sent out a palm strike, causing a clump of green-colored yuan power to appear in the air. It instantly condensed into a green wood-sharp claw, which smashed towards Jian Jingyun and Gue Wuchan. Jian Jingyun and Gue Wuchan simultaneously took a step forward and attacked at the same time. Both of their palms struck out at the same time. Two muffled bangs resounded as their figures were forced back several meters. Song Sun was originally stronger than Jian Jingyun and Gue Wuchan. Adding on the fact that he had unsealed 2 blood-marked seals, his strength was equivalent to the pinnacle of Origin Spirit Realm. As for Jian Jingyun and Gue Wuchan, they had only unsealed 1 blood-mark seal, and their strength was only at the pinnacle of Origin Meridian Realm. Even if the two of them joined forces, it would still be too much for them to contend against Song Senator. In fact, Song Sun's biggest advantage at this moment was that he could use his Yuan spirit, whereas Jian Jingyun and Gue Wuchan's Yuan spirits were suppressed and unable to be used. Bang! Bang! Song Sun once again made his move. Another 2 muffled bangs resounded as Jian Jingyun and Gue Wuchan were repelled once again. Blood seeped out from the corner of their mouths. "Are you guys all right?" Nie Tian's complexion couldn't help but sink upon seeing this. If this continued, Jian Jingyun and Gue Wuchan would be in danger. "We're fine," Jian Jingyun and Gue Wuchan replied, and stood in front of Nie Tian, not allowing Song Sun to approach them. Song Sun's mouth curled into a cold smile as he said with a mischievous tone, "You two are really loyal to your friends. You'd rather die to protect him. I'll say it again. What's there to fear if we die for our friends?" Jian Jingyun replied in a cold tone. He took a step forward and directly rushed towards Song's senior, Jian Jingyun. Gue Wuchan was suddenly startled. He didn't expect that Jian Jingyun would actually take the initiative to rush over. Jian Jingyun sent out a palm strike and loudly shouted, "Gue Wuchan, don't worry about me. Take Nie Tian and leave first." Gue Wuchan was suddenly startled. He ferociously took a step forward and chased after Jian Jingyun's figure. He also sent out a palm strike. How could he abandon Jian Jingyun? What kind of friend would he be if he did that? 2 ants, you're courting death. Song Sun saw that Jian Jingyun and Gue Wuchan were actually rushing to their deaths. The corner of his mouth curled into a cold smile. He simultaneously sent out a palm strike. Suddenly, 2 green sharp blades appeared in the air. They were like owls as they directly shot out. Bang! Bang! Two muffled sounds resounded. Jian Jingyun and Gue Wukong were simultaneously sent flying. Both of their chests were directly pierced through. Blood immediately gushed out. Jian Jingyun, Gue Wukong. Nietian roared in a low voice as he saw this. His eyes were filled with murderous intent. Jian Jingyun and Gue Wukong heavily smashed onto the ground, leaving two bloody trails behind them. The two of them struggled to stand up. Their bodies were already dyed red with blood. Nietian were fine. Jian Jingyun and Gue Wukong turned their heads to look at Nietian. The corners of their mouths curled into a smile. Nietian's heart trembled. His face was extremely moved. He suddenly took a step forward and roared, "Both of you, step back." In an instant, Nietian's weak body suddenly erupted with a valiant aura. It was silent and austere. Song's son frowned. His expression couldn't help but change. He couldn't help but be alarmed. He was really afraid that Nietian would use another heaven-defying counterattack. Nietian's eyes were gloomy. His entire body's aura surged. He could use the drifting killing seal again. However, this time, he would have to burn even more blood and chi. Moreover, his martial body would have to withstand an even stronger force of heaven and earth. His current state had already pushed his body to its limits. If he were to withstand such a huge pressure again, his martial arts foundation might be damaged. This would directly affect his martial arts talent, future cultivation, and even his future achievements in martial arts. "I'll risk it all." Nietian's eyes trembled. He roared in his heart. At this moment, he had no other choice. "Stinking brat, you, what do you want to do?" Song Sen saw Nietian's bloodshot eyes. He couldn't help but be frightened. His teeth started to chatter. This guy is really too timid. He's so afraid of death. I really don't know why he chose to come to a place like the Realm of Darkness. "I'll kill you," Nietianling said coldly. He squeezed out two words from the gaps of his teeth. Immediately, the blood and chi in his body started to surge. His whole body released a valiant aura. At this moment, a voice rang out. "Young master, stop." A nervous and urgent voice rang out, resounding in Nietian's ears. Nietian was stunned. Why did this voice sound so familiar? However, he couldn't remember who the owner of the voice was. Boom! The next moment, a ball of fire whizzed over. It directly flew past Nietian and directly hit Song Sen's body. Before Song Sen had time to react, he was directly killed by the ball of fire. He turned into a pile of ashes in the air. This! Nietian sucked in a breath of cold air at the sudden turn of events. Then his aura and blood chi dissipated, and he abruptly turned around. At this time, a figure of fire flew over and landed directly. Looking at the figure of fire in front of him, Nietian frowned. His expression changed instantly. He shouted in surprise, "Red Flame Devil, why is it you?" Red Flame Devil. The person in front of Nietian was actually Red Flame Devil. When Nietian was in the God realm in the Heaven realm, he had dealt with Red Flame Devil many times. Later, he found out that Red Flame Devil was originally Yi Qinghai's subordinate. Chapter 1841. Flame Devil King Lumen. Looking at the figure in front of him, Nietian was surprised, but at the same time he was excited. It had to be said that the Lumen had come at the right time. If he had been a little later, Nietian would have used the flowing killing seal again. In the end, he would have been able to kill Song Sen, but his martial arts foundation might have been damaged, which was not good for his future growth. "Young master, I came late, are you okay?" The Lumen looked at Nietian with a nervous expression. He was Yi Qinghai's subordinate, so there was nothing wrong with calling Nietian young master. "I'm fine." Nietian smiled faintly and said, "I just suffered some injuries, but I won't die." The Lumen's divine sense swept over Nietian's body. After confirming that the latter was fine, he relaxed a lot. Next, Nietian introduced the Lumen to Jian Jingyun and Gue Wushan, then asked, "Lumen, why are you here?" The Lumen didn't hide anything and told Nietian everything. It turned out that after they left the Heaven Realm's God Realm, they came to the 9 major realms and then to the Realm of Darkness. During this time in the Realm of Darkness, Yi Qinghai entered the path of massacre, and he became the king of massacre. So Old Hai is the king of massacre. Nie Tian frowned, his expression stiffening. He didn't expect that Yi Qinghai, with his strength, would also participate in the path of massacre and become the king of massacre. Now that he thought about what Yi Qinghai said before, he told Nie Tian to become the king of massacre. There must be a reason. Perhaps he had discovered something and needed Nie Tian to verify it. At this time, the lumen's eyes flickered and he looked at Nie Tian with a strange expression. Young master, do you know the current Emperor Ye's identity? Why identity? Nie Tian was slightly surprised, the curiosity in his eyes increasing. When Yi Qinghai appeared before, he didn't reveal his identity. It seemed that his identity was very secretive and couldn't be revealed. The lumen hesitated for a moment, then glanced at Jian Jingyun and Gue Wushan. Nie Tian naturally understood the lumen's meaning and said with a faint smile, "Don't worry, they are all trustworthy people." The lumen nodded and said, "Emperor Yi is now the extreme protector of the Black Lotus sect." Nie Tian frowned, and his expression stiffened. In fact, he had already guessed that Yi Qinghai had most likely joined the Black Lotus sect, or rather, sneaked into the Black Lotus sect. However, he was still very surprised to be able to confirm this. From the demonic Wei's words, it seemed that Yi Qinghai's status in the Black Lotus was quite high. What is the status of the extreme protector? Gue Wukan could not help but ask out of curiosity. His gaze swept across Nie Tian's group of three, and he said, "I believe you already know that the most powerful people in the Black Lotus are the Black Lotus King and the 12 Lotus Lords. In addition to these people, there are also extreme Yin and extreme Yang protectors in the Black Lotus. So that's how it is." Nie Tian's eyes trembled, and he couldn't help smiling. So that's how it is. Nie Tian's eyes flickered, and he couldn't help but smile. So that's how it is. Nie Tian's eyes trembled, and he couldn't help smiling. No wonder Yi Qinghai had left so quickly after appearing. He must have been avoiding the heads of the 12 Lotus Masters. Jian Jingyun was very calm as he looked at Nie Tian and asked, "The Emperor Yi you were talking about is the one we saw when we entered the city, right?" Nie Tian smiled and nodded. "Elder Hai joined the Black Lotus to investigate Father's matter, right?" Nie Tian looked at the lumen and asked. "Yes." The lumen nodded and said, "Emperor Yi has already found something, but we can't be sure yet." Nie Tian frowned. He obviously knew that Yi Qinghai didn't really join the Black Lotus sect. The fact that Yi Qinghai had chosen to stay by the Black Lotus King's side instead of directly questioning him showed that the Black Lotus King was definitely not weaker than Yi Qinghai. Nie Tian had just seen Yi Qinghai in action. He was already a peak paramount god. The Black Lotus King was no weaker than Yi Qinghai. He was definitely a peak paramount god. It seemed that the entire Black Lotus sect was no weaker than the Wind and Cloud Alliance. It was hard to imagine that a small place like the Domain of Darkness could hide such a terrifying power. "Young master, the reason why I am here is because of Lord Run Huang Ye's arrangement. I came here 5 days ago," Yi Fuqian said. The lumen looked at Nie Tian and said respectfully, "Emperor Yi had me enter the road of slaughter ahead of time to protect you and ensure that you can become the king of slaughter." Nie Tian nodded silently. It turned out that Yi Qinghai had already arranged everything. But Nie Tian was curious. How did Yi Qinghai know he was coming? After all, 5 days ago, Nie Tian hadn't even arrived at Slaughter City. The lumen looked at Nie Tian, already guessing what he was thinking. "Young master, the Black Lotus King has been aware of your whereabouts ever since you entered the Domain of Darkness." Eyebrows furrowed. Nie Tian's face grew grim as he asked, "How did the Black Lotus King detect my presence?" "The god devil nascent embryo." The lumen's expression was solemn. "The Black Lotus King has something on him that can sense the existence of a powerful bloodline. When he found out that you had the god devil nascent embryo, he wanted to kill you." Nie Tian's frown deepened. He finally understood why the 7 Lotus Lords had appeared as soon as he entered the Dark Mountain Range. The lumen's expression flickered. "But for some reason, the Black Lotus King didn't want to kill you anymore. He even promised that you would enter the road of slaughter. I also know that. Niet Tian nodded, his expression also puzzled. The Black Lotus King first wanted to kill him, but then didn't kill him. Moreover, he was secretly protecting him. This change in attitude was very strange. There was definitely something fishy going on. The Black Lotus King wants me to enter the road of slaughter. Could it be that my arrival will bring some sort of change to the road of slaughter? Niet Tian's expression flickered as he muttered. It's possible. The lumen's eyes flickered and he firmly nodded. I heard that the road of slaughter can absorb the power of a martial artist's bloodline. Perhaps young master's god devil nascent embryo is the power that the road of slaughter needs. Niet Tian's eyes narrowed. The more he thought about it, the more likely it seemed. After a while, Niet Tian became cold. He no longer thought about it. He looked at the lumen and suddenly asked, Lumen, only you and Old Hai came to the domain of darkness? What about Long Outyin and Kong Shirbua? Niet Tian knew that when Yi Qinghai left the heaven realm, besides the lumen, Long Outyin and Kong Shirbua were also with him. Lord Emperor Yi has already sent the Expo young master back to his clan. The lumen faintly smiled. Then he pointed above and said, As for Long Outyin, he is currently waiting for us in the world above. Chapter 1842. Lord Liu, what do you mean by the next level? Goe Wukong could not help but ask in confusion. The lumen smiled faintly and said, The path of slaughter is not limited to just this one world. There are 9 levels. Only by passing through the 9 levels and opening the gate of slaughter on the 9th level can you be considered to have passed the path of slaughter. Niet Tian chuckled. It seemed that the path of slaughter was rather similar to the glazed demon pagoda. They were both layered. The difference was that the glazed demon pagoda had 18 levels, while the path of slaughter had 9. The path of slaughter was a saint artifact. Every level was a world of its own. It was indeed extremely terrifying. We're currently in the 1st level, right? Niet Tian nodded slightly. Yes. The lumen nodded. Lord Huang Yi told me that every level of the path of slaughter has a gate of slaughter. As long as you open the gate of slaughter, you can enter the next level. Then how do we find and open the gate of slaughter? Niet Tian continued to ask. The lumen smiled faintly. The blood seal in our bodies not only suppresses our strength, but it also has another use, which is to sense the existence of the gate of slaughter. Niet Tian frowned. He was stunned. He had never thought that the blood seal would have such a use. The lumen said, When we first enter the path of slaughter, the blood seal does not sense the gate of slaughter clearly. It will only become more and more obvious later on. Niet Tian nodded with a smile. He finally understood why he had not encountered the powerful hand of slaughter. As it turned out, those people had entered the next level. Is Long Outyin already in the next level? Niet Tian became cold and could not help but ask. Yes. The lumen nodded heavily. When you first came to the darkness region, Lord Huang Yi had Long Outyin enter the path of slaughter. He's already in the 2nd level now. Niet Tian nodded with a smile. Suddenly, he thought of Long Outyin and murmured, I wonder how strong Long Outyin is now. He's almost at the sovereign level, the wayfarer said with a laugh. Niet Tian was stunned, and his face stiffened. Long Outyin's power was almost at the level of sovereign. This was indeed beyond Niet Tian's expectations. One must know that when Long Outyin left the celestial realm with Yi Qinghai, he was only a heavenly emperor. In just a few years, he had gone from heavenly emperor to overgod. This rate of advancement was just too terrifying. Although Niet Tian had entered the netherworld a little later than Long Outyin, he had many fortuitous encounters and had only reached the mid-stage high god realm. As expected, having a powerful teacher really makes a difference. Niet Tian laughed in his heart. He reckoned that Long Outyin must have experienced a lot while staying by Yi Qinghai's side all these years. That was why he had the strength he had today. Moreover, Long Outyin had the body of a 9 seals true dragon. What do we do now? Go to the gate of slaughter immediately? Goe Wuchan was already excited and asked nervously. Of course not now. The wayfarer waved his hand. Your injuries are not light, and you need to recover. Moreover, The cultivators in the previous layer are very powerful. If we enter the next layer now, it will be even more dangerous. However, we don't have much time. We must enter the second layer within 5 days. Why? Gue Wuchan was stunned and asked. The Wayfarer smiled bitterly. Because if I don't enter the second layer within 5 days, the seal in my body will self-destruct. Nie Tian and the others were stunned again. They still didn't quite understand. You should know that we were sealed before entering the gate of slaughter, right? The Wayfarer's eyes flashed. Nie Tian nodded and told him everything he knew about the Bloodvein seal. So the Bloodvein seal is a saint's seal. The Wayfarer couldn't help but be shocked after listening to Nie Tian. He didn't expect Nie Tian to know so much. Taking a deep breath, the Wayfarer began to explain. The gate of slaughter can sense the Bloodvein seal in every layer of the world. Moreover, each layer can only withstand 10 Bloodvein seals. In other words, the slaughtering hand in the first layer can only unseal 10 Bloodvein seals at most. If we wait until the 11th Bloodvein seal is unsealed, the current world won't be able to withstand it. The space-time aura will automatically detonate the Bloodvein seal. The Bloodvein seal is extremely powerful. Even if it's just one Bloodvein seal exploding, it's enough to kill a peak paramount god. This, Nie Tian and the others gasped. They didn't know that the gate of slaughter had such hidden dangers. The slaughtering hand's Bloodvein seal was constantly being unsealed. It was like a ticking time bomb, forcing the slaughtering hand to enter the next layer. Just like Nie Tian and the others, one of the blood seals in their bodies had been undone, and they only had 9 days left. Within these 9 days, they had to enter the second world. Otherwise, the surrounding space would detonate the blood seals, and they would die a miserable death. The Wayfarer had already unsealed 5 Bloodvein seals, so he had 5 days at most. Young Lord, rest for the next few days and recover as quickly as you can. In 4 days, we'll start searching for the gate of slaughter, the Wayfarer said, looking at Nie Tian. Okay. Nie Tian nodded in agreement. Next, Nie Tian and the others didn't waste any time. They found a valley and began to recover. The Wayfarer stood guard outside the valley, ensuring the safety of Nie Tian and the others. After the first day, another Bloodvein seal was unsealed in Nie Tian's body. He could use his Yuan spirit now, so he began to recover in the primal chaos origin coffin. After another 3 days, Nie Tian's injuries were mostly healed. He was back to his peak condition. Jian Jingyun and Gue Wuxian were deeply shocked by Nie Tian's recovery speed. It was simply abnormal. Their injuries weren't as serious as Nie Tian's. For days had only healed their wounds, but the scars were still there. Nie Tian, on the other hand, was full of vigor. There were no signs of injury at all. Of course, they didn't know that Nie Tian had the primal chaos origin coffin, which gave him almost 10 times more time than them. Of course, he could recover faster. Right now, Nie Tian had unsealed 5 Bloodvein seals. His strength was equivalent to the 9th level of the manifestation realm. Jian Jingyun and Gue Wuxian had also unsealed 5 Bloodvein seals. Their strength was around the 3rd level of the giant spirit realm. Although they had all unsealed 5 Bloodvein seals, their recovery speed was different. This was because Nie Tian's strength was different from Jian Jingyun and Gue Wuxian's. The Wayfarer saw that Nie Tian and the others had mostly recovered, so he said in a low voice, "Young master, let's go." The Wayfarer had unsealed 9 Bloodvein seals in his body, so he didn't have much time left. Okay. Nie Tian nodded with a smile. He signaled for the Wayfarer to lead the way. The Wayfarer had been in the path of slaughter the longest, so his perception of the gate of slaughter was the strongest. It was best for him to lead the way. Woo! At this time, the demonic Lu suddenly let out a long howl. It sounded like a wolf's howl. Nie Tian and the others were stunned. They didn't know what the Wayfarer was doing. Chapter 1843. Nie Tian, Jian Jingyun, and Gue Wuxian couldn't help feeling nervous as they looked at the giant scarlet wolves beside them. These giant scarlet wolves were the same as the ones that had attacked them a few days ago. However, they were a bit bigger, so they were presumably stronger. "Young master, don't be nervous. Lu Motu faintly smiled and said, "These giant wolves are under my control. Let them be our mounts." Nietion's group of 3 was speechless. So these giant wolves were attracted by Lu Motu. Nietion still didn't know that Lu Motu's beast-taming technique was so strong. Lu Motu took a step forward and was the first to jump onto the giant wolf's back. He immediately turned his head to look at Nietion's group and said, "Let's go." Nietion's group of 3 moved and directly stepped onto the giant wolf's back. 4 giant wolves carried 4 people as they madly ran through the forest. On the way, Nietion secretly sensed the blood runes in his body, and sure enough, he felt a reaction from the blood rune seal in his body, guiding him in a certain direction. About half an hour later, the 4 giant wolves had already madly run several hundred meters. Nietion faintly smiled and said, "Such a long distance. If we don't have a giant wolf mount, I'm afraid we'll really waste a lot of time." Lu Motu nodded and said, "Young master, please take a look. After the mountain range in front of us, we'll be able to find the slaughter gate." "All right," Nietion agreed, unable to conceal the excitement in his eyes. He could already sense the existence of the slaughter gate. As long as they entered the slaughter gate, they would be able to enter the second layer. Nietion was very curious about what the second layer of the slaughter gate would be like. At this time, Nietion noticed that the number of people in the surroundings had increased. Most of them were madly running, obviously wanting to reach the slaughter gate as soon as possible. But these people's speed clearly couldn't compare to the giant wolves. In a short moment, Nietion's group arrived in front of a huge mountain range. In front of them, there was a towering cliff that looked like a gigantic wall. There was a huge cave in the cliff. Everyone rushed towards the cave. "Young master, let's go in as well," shouted the Lumen. His body was like a ball of fire as he charged into the cave. Nietion and the other 2 followed closely and immediately entered the cave. The cave was very wide, at least a few thousand meters wide. Even a 10-meter-long giant wolf could run wildly inside. "These people have mounts. Stop them." At that moment, someone saw Nietion and the others riding on the huge wolves. They were extremely fast, and they couldn't help letting out a scream and pouncing over. Nietion's brows furrowed. He didn't hold back and sent out a palm strike at the person who pounced at him. Bang! With a muffled sound, the man was sent flying by Nietion's palm strike and fell heavily to the ground. However, he did not die and climbed back up. Nietion didn't pay any attention to him and continued to dash forward. However, the surrounding people all wanted to rush up. Someone actually jumped onto the giant wolf's body. Nietion suddenly looked at the person behind him. His gaze couldn't help but tremble. This person was actually someone who had unsealed 7 blood traces. His strength was around the peak of the giant spirit realm. Nietion's current strength was at the peak of the manifestation realm, an entire realm lower than the other party. "Brat, get down!" the person roared. He took a step forward and directly sent out a palm strike. The palm wind was sharp and straight at Nietion. Nietion's brows furrowed, but he wasn't afraid at all. He directly punched out. The moment the palm and fist collided, the person screamed and was directly sent flying. He landed on the ground and smashed into several people. That person definitely didn't expect Nietion to be so strong. The corner of Nietion's mouth twitched slightly. He said with a smile, "Do you think it's so easy to steal my things?" At this moment, even more people pounced over, trying to climb onto the giant wolf without a care for anything else. Just as Nietion was about to make a move, he suddenly sensed something. His expression changed. He fiercely stomped on the ground, and his figure directly flew up. Swish, swish, swish. Just as Nietion leaped up, a concentrated burst of air-piercing sounds rang out. Countless sharp arrows shot out from the rock walls on both sides, like a rainstorm, attacking everyone. In an instant, all kinds of screams sounded. More than half of the surrounding people directly fell down. Many people were directly shot into sieves. In midair, Nietion saw that the giant wolf under his feet was covered with countless sharp arrows. Its huge body was still madly rushing forward, but its speed was much slower. In the end, it still fell down. Nietion frowned. Star energy surged out of his body, and star soul wings appeared on his back. As the blood runes on his body were slowly unsealed, his primal star stone could also release some star energy. Nietion's gaze swept downwards, immediately locking onto Jian Jingyun and Gue Wushan. At this moment, the two of them had also been forced to abandon their giant wolf mounts. The two of them stood back to back, using the long swords in their hands to block the dense rain of arrows as they rushed forward. On the other side, Lu Montu had also abandoned his giant wolf mount. However, his strength was very strong, and it was no problem for him to deal with the rain of arrows alone. Nietion's silhouette flashed, arriving beside Jian Jingyun and Gue Wushan. He said, "Let's rush out together." The three of them leaned against each other. The star soul wings behind Nietion's back vibrated, directly sweeping Jian Jingyun and Gue Wushan up. His silhouette increased in speed, madly rushing forward. Nietion's speed was very fast. In the blink of an eye, he had already rushed past the rain of arrows. So dangerous! Nietion's silhouette halted. He turned his head and looked back. The ground was filled with corpses. Just a small rain of arrows had directly killed more than half of the cultivators. At this moment, Lu Montu also rushed out of the rain of arrows, arriving beside Nietion and the others. He asked anxiously, "Young master, are you guys all right?" "I'm fine." Nietion smiled faintly, after which he gazed ahead and said, "Let's continue." As they continued forward, Nietion and the others were more cautious. In front of them was a rain of arrows. Who knew what else was waiting for them below? However, after that, everything went smoothly. After a short while, Nietion and the others finally passed through the cave. In front of them, a vast mountain valley appeared. Nietion walked over, and when he saw the scene in the mountain valley, he was momentarily stunned. In the mountain valley, countless cultivators were engaged in a bitter battle. If one were to look carefully, they would discover that they were doing their utmost to squeeze towards a narrow stone door on a tall platform. The stone door was very small, roughly 1 meter wide and 2 meters tall. Under normal circumstances, only one person could pass through it. All the cultivators were doing their utmost to squeeze towards the stone door. Among them, there were even more violent and ruthless moves, not leaving any leeway. Nietion couldn't help but furrow his brows when he saw the corpses piled up on the ground. He didn't expect that the fighting here would be so intense. Without a doubt, that stone door was the gate of slaughter that led to the second level. In front of the gate of slaughter, Nietion felt an intense reaction from the blood runes in his body. It actually caused him to feel a strong desire to get closer to the gate of slaughter. The people here had no idea what the gate of slaughter was. However, the intense desire in their bodies caused them to disregard everything else, wanting to enter it. Chapter 1844. Nietion stood outside the valley and looked at the scene inside. He couldn't help but frown and murmur. It seems that entering the slaughter gate won't be an easy task. These people are too fierce. Will they die if we wait? Gue Wuchan cried out in surprise. Nietion glanced at him and said, "Many people have already unsealed 10 blood traces in their bodies. If they wait any longer, they will really die." The luminous diagram looked at the scene in front of him with a helpless expression. There were many cultivators in the valley who had unsealed 9 or 10 blood traces in their bodies. Their strength had already recovered to the true element realm or even the spirit wheel realm. These people had a great advantage when fighting for the slaughter gate. Moreover, the more blood traces unsealed in their bodies, the stronger their desire to enter the slaughter gate was. Right now, Nietion and the others wanted to compete with these people. It was a bit difficult. However, they couldn't wait forever because there were still a large number of cultivators rushing towards the valley. Even if they waited, the situation wouldn't change. "Nietion, what should we do now?" Jian Jingyan looked at Nietion and asked for his opinion. Nietion frowned and couldn't help but look at the luminous diagram. Nietion and the others could wait until their strength increased. However, the luminous diagram had already unsealed 9 blood traces, so he didn't have much time left. The The luminous diagram knew what Nyetian was worried about, so he stepped forward and said, "Young master, let's wait for one more day for my 10th seal to be unsealed." The luminous diagram knew what Nyetian was worried about, so he stepped forward and said, "All right." When the luminous diagram unsealed 10 seals, this was the limit of the first layer world. However, even at that time, Nyetian and the others still had one more day. The next day, Nyetian and the others didn't enter the valley, but waited quietly outside. The other cultivators desperately wanted to rush into the slaughter gate. They didn't know anything about the blood traces, but they were driven by the seals, so they wholeheartedly wanted to enter the slaughter gate. A day later, 10 seals on the demonic row diagram had been unsealed, while 6 seals on Nyetian, Jian Jingyun, and Gue Wuchan had been unsealed. Their strength had increased by quite a bit. "Young master, let's do it." The demonic Weiyu stared at the gate of slaughter, his eyes blazing. He could clearly feel that the seal in his body had become unstable, as if it was extremely restless. "Okay." Nyetian nodded and stepped into the valley. The smell of blood in the valley was very heavy. Nyetian had just steadied himself when he felt the strong smell of blood assaulting his face. "Get out of my way." Right at this moment, a ruthless voice rang out as a silhouette dashed over, slamming out with a palm, aiming for Nyetian. Nyetian's brows furrowed slightly, and he also struck out with his palm. The palm force was forceful, and it directly sent that person flying. Nyetian had unsealed 6 blood traces in his body, and at this moment, he already had the strength of a 5th-layer giant spirit. His palm strike was already very powerful. Nyetian was confident that even if he were to face a cultivator with 8 or 9 seals unsealed, he would still be able to easily deal with them. At this time, the silhouettes of the Weiyu's group landed. The 4 of them stood back to back, with the demonic road diagram at the forefront, approaching the gate of slaughter. The demonic road diagram strength was the strongest among the group of cultivators. With a palm strike, he directly sent several people flying. Nyetian's group of 3 closely followed him, and very soon, they were only about 20 meters away from the gate of slaughter. But at this distance, the surrounding people were obviously very strong, and they all rushed forward, attacking each other ruthlessly. The surrounding area was filled with ghostly wails and wolf howls. "Get down from me." At this time, a silhouette appeared, and this person struck out with his palm. A huge palm shadow appeared, and unexpectedly, several cultivators were directly sent flying. "Good chance." Seeing this scene, Nyetian's face lit up, and he immediately looked at Jian Jingyan. The latter immediately understood, and his silhouette flashed, directly rushing over. That cultivator saw a silhouette flying past him, and his complexion couldn't help but sink. He wanted to attack again, but he felt a sharp chi attack from behind. He suddenly turned around and directly struck out with his palm, killing the person behind him. Jian Jingyun's silhouette was extremely fast, and he directly arrived at the entrance of the gate of slaughter. "Don't wait for us, you go in first." Nyetian looked at Jian Jingyun and shouted. Jian Jingyun didn't hesitate, and directly stepped forward, and his silhouette disappeared into the gate of slaughter. Damn it! That cultivator saw that his attack was taken advantage of by someone else, and immediately flew into a rage. His eyes were bloodshot, and he unwaveringly locked on Nyetian and shouted, "Smelly brat, this father will kill you." Boom! As the raging voice rang out, the man's figure blurred into motion. He didn't even care about the gate of slaughter as he directly charged towards Nyetian. He punched out, and the afterimages of his punches were like killing intent, along with an enormous pressure. Nyetian felt the enormous pressure, and his complexion couldn't help but change. He didn't take the punch head on, and his silhouette moved to the side, avoiding the fist shadows. That person's fist missed, and he flew into a rage out of humiliation. Both of his eyes were bloodshot, and he couldn't wait to skin Nyetian alive. "Young master, you guys go first." At this time, the voice of the demonic lumen resounded in Nyetian's ears. Nyetian turned around and saw that demonic lumen's palm strike had sent several people flying, and then he stood guard there, letting Yetian and the others go first. Gue Wuchan was very quick-witted, and his silhouette fiercely rushed over, and like a sharp sword, he instantly arrived at the gate of slaughter, and without any hesitation, he directly entered. "Young master!" The demonic lumen immediately looked at Niet Tian and shouted loudly. "In," Niet Tian replied, and his silhouette flashed, rushing forward. But at this time, that cultivator once again sent out a palm strike, and a terrifying palm energy spread out, covering an extremely large area, making it impossible for Niet Tian to dodge. "You dare to touch the young master. You're courting death." Seeing this, the demonic lumen roared, and a ball of flames appeared in his palm and directly slammed down, turning into a terrifying palm of flames in the air, forcing that cultivator to retreat several steps. Niet Tian seized this opportunity, and with a ruthless stomp, he directly rushed up the high platform and arrived at the entrance of the Gate of Slaughter. "Demonic lumen, quickly come up." Niet Tian stood still and hurriedly shouted to the demonic lumen. The demonic lumen roared, and with a palm strike, he pushed away the people beside him, and then his silhouette flashed, landing beside Niet Tian. The two of them looked at each other and smiled, directly entering the Gate of Slaughter. "Damn it, Qin Feng, will not let you off." At this time, an enraged voice resounded in Niet Tian's ears. It was the cultivator who wanted to kill him just now. "So this guy was called Qin Feng. I'll be waiting for you." The corner of Niet Tian's mouth curved into a smile, and his silhouette immediately disappeared into the Gate of Slaughter. The moment he entered the slaughter gate, Niet Tian felt a terrifying space-time pressure coming from all directions, almost crushing his body. However, this feeling didn't last long. In the blink of an eye, the space-time pressure disappeared. Niet Tian and the demonic lumen's silhouettes landed, and they arrived in a completely unfamiliar world. This was a vast desert, and as far as the eye could see, there was only an endless expanse of yellow sand. In the air, sand and dust filled the air like a gigantic wild snake, dancing in the air. Chapter 1845. Niet Tian looked around. Amidst the yellow sand that filled the sky, there was a sandstorm that was fluttering about. He looked around for a long time, but he still couldn't see Jian Jingyun or Gue Wushan's shadow. "Young master, they are gone." The Lumo too was also nervous. He looked all around, but he couldn't see Jian Jingyun and Gue Wushan. He couldn't even see the silhouette of the others. "Strange." Niet Tian frowned. The worry in his eyes deepened. "What's that sound?" At this moment, the Lumo too seemed to have discovered something. He cried out in alarm. His face changed. Niet Tian looked at the Lumo Tuesday. He heard a rumbling sound coming from the ground. His face sank. "Young master, be careful." The Lumo too shouted, but it was too late. Bang! Bang! Suddenly, two muffled sounds came from the ground. A terrible power rolled up Niet Tian and the Lumo Tuesday. They turned into two sandstorms and rushed into the sky. "Young master," the Lumo too was shocked. He didn't care about his own safety and shouted Niet Tian's name. Niet Tian was in the middle of the sandstorm. His ears were filled with the sound of rolling sand. He couldn't hear the Lumo two's voice. Damn it! Niet Tian's figure kept rushing up. He roared and wanted to break the sand around him. But just as he was about to move, he felt his body was enveloped by a huge power. He couldn't move at all. Not good. Niet Tian's heart sank. His face changed. He couldn't help but worry. He finally understood why he couldn't see Jian Jingyun and Gue Wushan. They were also swept away by the sandstorm. As it turned out, the yellow sandstorm that Niet Tian had seen just now was actually coming from the ground. The sandstorm was very terrifying. It seemed to be able to sense the existence of cultivators and directly pull them into it. Niet Tian did his best to resist, but he found that the more he resisted, the stronger the power enveloping him became. It almost crushed his body. "Calm down." Niet Tian took a deep breath and stopped resisting. He immediately felt that the power had weakened a lot. He looked up into the sky and saw that the yellow sandstorm was reaching all the way to the horizon, like a passage between heaven and earth. Niet Tian's figure was still rushing upwards, but his speed was much slower. He calmed down and carefully sensed the surrounding space, faintly sensing the aura of an array. Formation. When he noticed this, Nietion couldn't help but gasp, and he seemed to have understood something in his heart, causing him to exclaim in shock. Could it be that the entire second level is a yellow sand grand formation? The more Nietion thought about it, the more he felt that his guess was correct. The world of the second level was a yellow sand formation. Everyone who entered the world of the second level would automatically enter the formation and be controlled by the yellow sandstorm. After understanding this, Nietion became much calmer and no longer thought of resisting. He knew that if he was in such a huge formation, he would not be able to break it with his strength. Therefore, he could only adapt to the situation in front of him. Nietion looked at the yellow sandstorm around him. It was like a giant yellow sand snake, and he was trapped in the body of the giant snake. This formation shouldn't be used to kill people. Otherwise, no one would be able to escape the trap of the formation. Nietion murmured and began to sense it carefully. After a while, Nietion finally noticed something fishy. As he kept rising in the yellow sandstorm, he felt the pressure around him increase. This kind of pressure was similar to the gravity array. It made a warrior feel that their bodies were heavy, and the pressure they felt was getting heavier. It seems that this formation is a test to test a warrior's martial body. Only a warrior with a strong martial body can pass the test of the formation. Nietion looked up and murmured, "The pressure above will definitely increase. As long as I can reach the highest point, I can probably enter the world of the third level directly." After thinking about all this, Nietion completely calmed down. He simply stopped resisting and sat cross-legged and began to cultivate. Enduring the test in the yellow sandstorm, Nietion felt that his martial body was showing signs of slowly becoming stronger. In the next few days, Nietion spent his time cultivating. As time passed, the blood seal in Nietion's body began to slowly unseal. His strength was also constantly recovering, and his position in the yellow sandstorm was getting higher and higher. Nietion felt the pressure in the space around him increase. He could clearly feel the pressure on his body. The pressure in the space is very obvious. I'm afraid that less than half of the people will be able to pass the test of the formation. Nietion murmured as he felt the pressure around him. The test of the world of the second level was very good, but there were definitely only a few people who could pass and enter the world of the third level. Then, on the 9th day, Nietion felt the aura in his body suddenly change. "I've broken through," Nietion shouted joyfully. His eyes couldn't help but tremble. Although his strength had yet to recover, he could feel that his strength had advanced from mid-stage high god to late-stage high god. It seems that cultivating in the yellow sand formation is quite effective. Nietion smiled faintly. The corners of his mouth couldn't help but rise. By this time, 14 of the blood seal in his body had been unsealed. His strength had recovered to the heavenly evolution realm. His battle strength had made a qualitative leap. "I'm almost at the top. I'll be able to rush out of the second level very soon." Nietion looked above his head. He could clearly see the top of the yellow sandstorm, but his face was somewhat worried. He said, "I hope the others are also fine. Luo Mo2, Jian Jingyun, and Gue Wu Qin. The three of them must be going through the same test as Nietion." Nietion believed that with their talent, there shouldn't be any problems. A day later, Nietion was finally about to reach the top of the yellow sandstorm. At this time, he could clearly feel the powerful pressure in the space around him. It was almost suffocating. Nietion's figure slowly ascended, but the speed at which he ascended was not something he could control. He couldn't control his body at all in the formation. Almost there, Nietion took a deep breath. He was less than 100 meters away from the top of the yellow sandstorm. Every moment that followed was a great torment. Under that enormous pressure, even breathing was difficult. 50 meters, 30 meters, 10 meters, 5 meters, 1 meter. Finally, Nietion's figure reached the top. He suddenly stood up and immediately felt the pressure around him disappear. Nietion had finally passed the test of the second level. "The third level, I'm coming." Nietion looked at the space-time barrier above his head. His figure moved, and he directly jumped into the space-time barrier. However, at this moment, Nietian felt his body sink. He couldn't help but scream, "Ah!" The next moment, he immediately came to his senses. He looked around and found that he was actually underwater. "What's going on?" Nietian was stunned, and then he let out a strange cry. Chapter 1846. As soon as Nietian came out from the desert, he found himself in an underwater world. The sudden turn of events left him dumbfounded. What's going on here? The second world is a desert, and the third world is an unfathomably deep body of water. Nietian was astonished. At the same time, he sensed the water pressure around him and began to observe his surroundings. However, at this moment, a violent whirlpool of water suddenly appeared, directly wrapping around him. Instantly, a huge and boundless water pressure spread over, causing him to be controlled once again, unable to move. Nietian let out a cry of astonishment. He looked up and saw that the whirlpool he was in looked like an enormous water snake that stretched endlessly. I understand now. Upon seeing this scene, Nietian suddenly understood something. His eyes couldn't help but twinkle. He thought to himself, what I experienced in the second world was a sandstorm. Now, it has turned into a whirlpool of water. In almost an instant, Nietian figured out that the third world was yet another trial for a martial artist. As expected, his body started to rise slowly in the whirlpool. At the same time, he felt the water pressure around him gradually increase. Interesting. Having figured it out, Nietian no longer panicked. Instead, he was pleasantly surprised. Although the terrifying pressure was a great burden on his martial body, under such circumstances, his cultivation speed was far faster than in ordinary environments. Previously, when he was in the second world, Nietian had successfully broken through to late-stage high god. Under normal circumstances, it would take him at least several months to advance to late-stage high god. After all, after reaching the divine realm, it was extremely difficult to advance to the next level. Nietian knew that he was facing yet another trial, and he instantly calmed down. What happened next was just as Nietian had expected. 10 days later, Nietian arrived at the highest layer of the third world. He could clearly see the space-time barrier at the top of the water. A thin layer of space-time barrier separated two completely different worlds. We're here. At this moment, the pressure around Nietian's body had already expanded to the extreme. He took a deep breath and directly leaped up. Like a nimble fish, he jumped into the space-time barrier. So hot. In the blink of an eye, time and space changed, and the environment changed completely. Nietian passed through the barrier of time and space. But before he could steady himself, he felt a terrifying and blazing aura hit him in the face, causing him to cry out in alarm. He steadied his body and looked around. At first, he was stunned. Then he chuckled and murmured, "The fourth world is the world of flames." At this moment, Nietian was in a sea of flames. The space was filled with burning flames. It was extremely violent and released a terrifying, blazing aura. Another round of tests. This is great. Looking at everything before him, Nietian was overjoyed. He was not afraid of this kind of test at all. Instead, he liked it very much. In this kind of test, his cultivation speed was extremely fast. He could even feel his martial body constantly becoming stronger. Boom! Then, a flame appeared and enveloped Nietian. It's starting. Nietian did not resist. He directly sat cross-legged and entered the state of cultivation. 10 days passed in the blink of an eye. Nietian came to the top of the world of flames and once again saw the familiar space-time barrier. He was already familiar with crossing the space-time barrier. His figure moved and directly jumped into the space-time barrier. As soon as Nietian entered the next world, he was stunned by the scene that greeted his eyes. This was a green world. There were lush, giant trees everywhere, full of vitality, and the space was filled with an extremely rich aura of life. The fifth world, giant tree world, Nietian immediately understood. Feeling the aura of life in the surrounding space, a comfortable smile appeared on his face. At this moment, a giant tree next to him suddenly swayed, and then a branch stretched out, turning into a giant green hand in the air, grabbing Nietion's grandmother. In an instant, Nietion felt a surging sea of life aura rush over, opening all the meridians in his body, and his body was indescribably comfortable. This giant tree world is not a test at all, but a complete enjoyment. Nietion murmured, his eyes filled with joy. Endless life aura rushed over, rushing in scrupulously into Nietion's body, turning into a surging force that impacted his meridians. Perhaps other martial artists would feel pressure and pain during this process, but Nietion did not feel it at all. He was someone who had fused with the source of the earth, and his body needed this kind of huge life aura. It was no exaggeration to say that the richer the life aura, the more advantageous it was for Nietion. He did not feel any pressure at all. At this time, Nietion began to understand something. The corners of his lips curled up slightly as he said, "It seems that the test of the slaughter path should be the 9 elements test." 9 elements, that is, the 9 elements of metal, wood, water, fire, earth, wind, thunder, light, and darkness. Starting from the second world, Nietion had to withstand the test. Yellow sand appeared, followed by water, then fire, and finally wood. These 4 worlds should correspond to the 4 elements of earth, water, fire, and wood. Without a doubt, the next world to appear would be the world of metal. Then, another 10 days passed. Nietion left the giant tree world and entered a world of dazzling golden light. Just as Nietion was about to take a good look, a golden giant appeared and directly swallowed him into its belly. Nietion naturally did not resist. He had long since become accustomed to this kind of treatment. 10 days later, Nietion opened the golden world and entered a world of wind and thunder. Astral winds roared and purple lightning whizzed. The world of the 7th level was actually a vast and endless world of wind and thunder. The world of the 7th level, the world of wind and thunder. Nietion looked at the violent scene before him, but the corner of his lips revealed a faint smile. The world of the 7th level was a little out of his expectations. It was actually a world formed by the combination of the 2 elements of wind and thunder. Experiencing the test of 2 elements at the same time, this made Nietion feel extremely excited. Boom! Right at this time, in the world of wind and thunder, a hurricane howled. Looking closely, the hurricane was actually surging with the terrifying power of thunder and lightning. "Come!" Nietion laughed wildly. His feet moved, and he directly rushed towards the hurricane. The moment his figure entered the hurricane, Nietion felt his body tremble. Immediately, countless wind blades rushed over. The wind blades contained the power of thunder and lightning, causing Nietion to feel pain and a trace of strange numbness. However, this feeling did not last for long. Soon, Nietion felt the terrifying power of thunder and lightning, almost splitting his body apart. The terrifying impact wreaked havoc in his body. While Nietion was in intense pain, he also felt the 9 dragon veins continuously growing stronger. The dragon veins originally contained the powerful power of thunder and lightning, which was compatible with the attribute of the world of wind and thunder. It could absorb the powerful power of wind and thunder. Chapter 1847. After entering the 8th world, Nietion's expression instantly became one of astonishment as he looked at the scene before him. His mouth slightly opened, but no words came out. In fact, he had already guessed that the 8th level would be a world of light and darkness. However, the world that was presented in front of him shocked him tremendously. This was a vast and boundless world. Standing here, it was as though he was standing in the vast universe. This world was chaotic and vast. Light and darkness clashed, devoured, and merged with each other. The entire space was filled with terrifying light and darkness elemental energy. Looking at everything in front of him, Nietion was shocked from the bottom of his heart. It was as though his soul was trembling. He could sense that this chaotic world seemed to contain all the possibilities. Compared to this world, Nietion felt very small and insignificant. After a while, Nyetian calmed down and mumbled, "The world at the beginning of creation should be like this." However, at this moment, the chaotic time and space around him suddenly shook. Then, a chaotic vortex appeared and surged towards him. Nyetian's eyes lit up. He could not hide the excitement on his face. He knew that among the 9 elemental energies, light and darkness were the strongest. He really wanted to see how powerful the test of light and darkness was. Boom! The chaotic vortex spread over and enveloped Nyetian. Instantly, a terrifying force pressed down from all directions. Nyetian was prepared to withstand the incoming pressure. In the next moment, the terrifying chaotic energy pressed down and surged into Nyetian's body. However, at this moment, a strange scene occurred. Boom! Nyetian felt his body tremble slightly. Then, the chaotic energy in his body disappeared. Huh? What's going on? Nyetian was stunned. He did not know what was happening. Then, something even weirder happened. In the next moment, the vortex of chaos that had enveloped Nyetian flew back into his body and vanished. What's going on? Nyetian was dumbfounded as he looked around at the empty surroundings. He had no idea what was going on. This scene was too strange. Previously, he had been controlled by all kinds of forces, but now that the primal chaos vortex wrapped around him, he was actually directly absorbed. Boom! At that moment, Nyetian suddenly felt a strange power surging within his body, causing him to tremble. Nyetian became cold. He examined his body and immediately understood. It's the primal chaos original coffin. The primal chaos origin coffin. It was none other than the primal chaos origin coffin that had directly absorbed the primal chaos vortex. At this moment, 66 of the blood traces in Nyetian's body had been unsealed. His strength had also recovered to early-stage low god realm. However, he still couldn't open the 9 extremities, and his divine sense couldn't connect to the nascent embryo space. But now, Nyetian could use his origin meridians, origin spirit, and demon essence. It was just that he couldn't display their full potential. Nyetian looked at the primal chaos original coffin. A chaotic vortex was floating there. It was the chaotic vortex that had just been absorbed. The primal chaos original coffin has directly absorbed the chaotic vortex. After a long time, Nyetian's stiff expression finally reacted. He let out a strange cry, his face full of shock. He had never imagined that the primal chaos original coffin would have such terrifying power that it could directly absorb the chaotic vortex. At that moment, another chaotic vortex surged over and enveloped Nyetian. But just as this chaotic vortex was about to release its pressure, it was once again absorbed by the primal chaos original coffin. This extremely strange scene stunned Nyetian. He stood rooted to the ground with a blank look on his face. Previously, he only knew that the primal chaos original coffin could slow down the flow of time and nurture the 9 extremities chaos beast. But he had never known that the primal chaos original coffin could also absorb the terrifying chaotic vortex. The chaotic vortex was a powerful combination of light elemental and dark elemental energy. Everything that had happened had far exceeded Nyetian's expectations. Nyetian looked at the primal chaos original coffin. The 9 extremities chaos beast was still lying there quietly. There was nothing strange about it. Speaking of which, Nyetian had not used the 9 extremities chaos beast in a very long time. He did not even know how strong the chaos beast was now. Following that, more chaotic vortexes surged towards Nyetian. However, all of them were absorbed by him. The primal chaos original coffin was like a bottomless pit, greedily devouring the chaotic energy. Nyetian stood rooted to the ground. He could feel the chaotic energy within the primal chaos original coffin getting thicker and thicker. If it continues to absorb at this rate, I'm afraid all the chaotic energy in the entire chaotic world will be sucked dry by the primal chaos original coffin. Nyetian said in shock. At the same time, he looked into the distance. Based on the primal chaos original coffin's current rate of absorption, it could definitely absorb the entire chaotic world. Let's not think too much first. Since the primal chaos original coffin can absorb this energy, it should be able to withstand it, Nietian muttered to himself. He finally calmed down. At that moment, more chaotic vortexes surged over and surged into Nietian's body. They were all absorbed by the primal chaos original coffin. Nietian did not resist anymore. He allowed the primal chaos original coffin to absorb the chaotic energy. This state continued for several days. The chaotic energy in the chaotic world became significantly weaker. Large amounts of chaotic energy were being absorbed by Nietian's primal chaos original coffin. This chaotic energy was formed by the fusion of light and darkness. Jiang Yi did not know what kind of changes it would bring to the primal chaos original coffin. After another few days, the entire chaotic world became clear. The entire space became clear. The chaotic energy in the chaotic world has been completely absorbed by the primal chaos original coffin. Nietian opened his eyes. He was stunned. He was extremely shocked. After 9 days, all the chaotic energy had been absorbed by the primal chaos original coffin. After a while, Nietian became cold. He looked around him. He suddenly saw several figures in the distant sky. They were looking at him in a daze. Nietian was stunned. He immediately understood that these people were other cultivators. The chaotic world was the 8th level of the path of massacre. Nietian was not the only person who could enter the 8th level. These people who had entered the 8th level were completely confused. They could only stare at Nietian in a daze. Nietian looked around. He wanted to find the Lumeng, Tu, and the others. However, at this moment, he suddenly felt a strange feeling in his body. Bang! Nietian felt a muffled sound in his body. He could not help but be stunned. He did not know what was happening. Bang! Bang! Following that, 2 more muffled sounds rang out. Nietian felt the aura in his body skyrocketing. It's the blood vein seal. Nietian suddenly realized what was happening. He cried out in surprise. His expression instantly changed. The muffled sound in his body was the sound of the blood vein seal suddenly breaking. Chapter 1848. Oh no! Thinking of the self-destruction of the seal, Nietian screamed in his heart, and his face turned pale. The blood tray seal was a sage-level seal. Even if it was just the self-destruction of one seal, it would be enough to kill Nietian in an instant. The 78th seal. Nietian immediately calmed down and sensed the situation in his body. He had already unsealed 75 of the blood tray seals. Bang! Then, a muffled sound came from his body, and the 79th seal was unsealed. Shit! Shocked, Nietian cursed and looked up to the sky. Wings of astral soul appeared on his back, and he directly rushed up. He had to enter the 9th level immediately. That world could withstand 90 blood tray seals. Nietian's figure was as fast as lightning. But unfortunately, the speed of the blood tray seals in his body was even faster. Bang! Another muffled sound, and the 80th seal was unsealed. Not good! Nietian screamed and looked up. He was still far from the space-time barrier of the 8th level. It was not enough for him to enter the 9th level before the 81st seal was unsealed. But he did not give up and continued to fly up. Bang! Just as Nietian was less than a kilometer away from the space-time barrier, a muffled sound came from his body. The 81st seal was unsealed. In an instant, Nietian's face stiffened and his pupils suddenly shrank. It was as if time and space had stopped. Boom! At this moment, a wave of space-time aura flowed into Nietian's body. Suddenly, the blood tray seals attached to his body became active and violent. They were like wild beasts that crazily attacked. Nietian let out a miserable howl as a tearing pain spread through his entire body. His face twisted into a hideous expression. But what was even more strange was that the blood tray seals in his body were still unsealed. Nietian felt a real sense of death. But even under such circumstances, he did not give up. He still tried to circulate his Yuan Meridian Devil Chi to resist the power of the blood tray seals. However, the blood seal was so powerful that Nietian couldn't resist it at all. Boom! 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 The blood-veined seal, which had gone completely out of control, kept pounding against his body, causing it to distort. In the next instant, the tearing pain reached its peak. Nyetian felt as if his body and soul were about to be completely crushed. Nyetian still wanted to resist, but he could no longer release any strength. Nyetian could feel the 100 blood traces within his body being unsealed. His body was about to explode in an instant. However, right at this moment, an unexpected event occurred. Boom! All of a sudden, the Primal Chaos original coffin trembled as a terrifying amount of Primal Chaos energy gushed out, filling up Nyetian's entire body. Nyetian's consciousness suddenly became sober. Looking inside his body, he found that the Primal Chaos energy was crazily swallowing the blood seal. In the blink of an eye, the Primal Chaos force devoured all the blood runes. Nyetian's body, which was about to explode, immediately returned to normal. At the same time, chaotic force surged back into the chaotic origin coffin. Everything returned to normal, as if nothing had happened. Nyetian stood rooted to the ground with a blank look on his face. He had no idea what was going on. The blood seal was about to explode, but it was instantly swallowed by the Primal Chaos energy. All of this was too strange. The blood seal was a saint seal. What kind of power was the Primal Chaos energy to be able to swallow the saint seal? Nyetian. Just as Nyetian's face was filled with astonishment, a familiar voice rang out. It was the little fat cat's voice. Little fatty. Only then did Nyetian react, and subconsciously called out, "Nyetian, are you all right?" Fat Cat saw that Nyetian's expression wasn't right, and couldn't help but ask anxiously. Nyetian was stunned for a few seconds before he calmed down and murmured, "I'm fine." From the moment the blood seal was unsealed to the moment the seal was swallowed by the chaotic force, everything happened in an extremely short period of time. There was no time for Nyetian to think at all. However, Nyetian knew that it was the most dangerous moment he had encountered since his rebirth. If it wasn't for the chaotic force, he would have died from the seal's explosion. Why did the seal suddenly unseal? Why could the chaotic force swallow the blood seal? Nyetian couldn't figure out what had happened from the beginning to the end. "Nyetian, what happened?" At this time, Little Fat Cat's voice rang out again. He had never seen Nyetian in such a state before. Nyetian forced himself to calm down and looked at Fat Cat again. Only then did he believe that everything that had happened just now was real. Because the blood seal in Nyetian's body had been completely unsealed and swallowed by the chaotic force. His strength had completely recovered. Nyetian was naturally overjoyed to be able to communicate with Fat Cat again. Afterwards, Nyetian explained everything that had happened before he asked, "Fat, I really don't understand. What's going on?" Little Fat Cat was taken aback by Nyetian's words. In the end, it personally confirmed Nyetian's Primal Chaos original coffin. Its blue eyes flickered as it fell into deep thought. Fat Cat finally spoke after a long while. He shook his head and said, "Your chaotic coffin is a little strange. I'm guessing that the chaotic force might have triggered the unsealing of the blood seal and then swallowed it. Since the chaotic force belongs to the path of massacre, it's not strange that it can swallow the blood seal." Nyetian nodded, but his face was still filled with astonishment. "Nyetian, how do you feel now?" Little Fat Cat didn't think too much about it and asked excitedly. Nyetian sensed his body. His aura was several times stronger than before. After going through the 9 elements of the path of massacre, Nyetian's martial body had become even more powerful. His strength had reached late-stage High God, and he even showed signs of advancing to the peak of High God realm. Nyetian was convinced that his current battle prowess was several times stronger than before. In his current state, even if he didn't activate his 3 forbidden magics, he would still be able to kill an overgod. But what he was more concerned about was how the chaotic coffin would affect his future cultivation after absorbing such a large amount of chaotic force. "Oh, I haven't found the others yet." At this moment, Nyetian suddenly remembered that he hadn't found the Waymo 2 and the others. He couldn't help but cry out. Then, he looked into the distance and activated the divine glyphs, enveloping the surroundings. The increase in strength had made Nietion's perception even stronger. The Waymo 2. In the next moment, Nietion found the Waymo 2's figure and shouted. But then, he sensed that something was wrong. His eyes narrowed and his face instantly darkened. "Young master!" The Waymo 2 looked at Nietion and shouted with great difficulty. Blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. A stern figure stood behind the Waymo 2's day. He stared at Nietion with cold eyes and said coldly, "Brat, we meet again. Nangongju." Nietion looked at the stern figure and called out his name in a deep voice. Chapter 1849. Nietion stared at Nangongju with a gloomy gaze. His eyes were filled with cold, killing intent. Nangongju also stared at Nietion coldly. An evil smile hung on the corner of his lips. He said coldly, "Brat, I didn't think that you could enter the 8th floor. Looks like you're quite talented, but unfortunately, you're still going to die here. Nangongju, the person you want to kill is me. If you're still a man, then fight me to the death." Nietion took a step forward. His aura surged. It was extremely majestic. But at this moment, Nietion purposely held back his strength. He purposely suppressed his aura. He wanted to give Nangongju a false impression that he was very weak. "With just you?" Nangongju looked at Nietion and smiled cold. He said, "Judging from your aura, you're at most a lower god. How are you going to fight me?" As soon as he said that, Nangongju's aura surged out wildly. A terrifying aura filled the air. The surrounding people immediately felt the pressure and retreated. Nietion felt Nangongju's aura and thought, "This guy is really strong. His strength has already recovered to the mid-god level." Nangongju was originally a mid-god. Right now, 80 of the blood runes in his body had been unsealed. His strength had recovered to the mid-god level. "Brat, since you're looking for death, I'll send you on your way." At this moment, Nangongju no longer cared about the warlock diagram. He roared and took a step forward. His figure pressed down, and he faced off against Nietion in the air. Nangongju was very strong. He believed that with his current strength, he could instantly kill Nietion. But unfortunately, he was tricked. Nietion looked at Nangongju, and his lips curled into a cold smile. Then his aura surged. It was several times stronger than before. Seeing this, Nangongju's eyes narrowed. He cried out, "Brat, you hid your strength." Nietion laughed and didn't waste any time. He said coldly, "Nangongju, make your move." How could Nangongju have thought that Nietion's body was no longer sealed by the blood traces, and his strength had recovered to its peak? When the others saw Nietion's aura, their eyes trembled, not knowing what was going on. Damn it! Nangongju felt that he had been tricked. In an instant, he let out an enraged roar. His entire body's aura surged as he violently punched out with his palm. In the sky, a gigantic palm appeared, pressing down on Nietion. Nietion's eyes flickered, and the starlight heaven slash appeared in his hand. With a stab, the palm image in the air shattered. "Nangongju, is this your true strength?" "Too weak." Nietion stood tall in the sky and smiled coldly. Sword chi swirled around him, and his aura was cold and murderous. Actually, the current Nietion had many ways to kill Nangongju. He could use the 3 great forbidden skills and increase his strength to the peak of Overgod. He could kill Nangongju instantly with casual strike. He could also use the 9 extremities and let Jing Chun or Di Shirtian take action. They could also kill Nangongju instantly. However, Nietion didn't want to do that. He wanted to fight against Nangongju, who was a mid-overgod with the strength of a late god. Nangongju was very strong. It was perfect for Nietion to test his current strength. Arrogant, Nangongju's eyes were filled with killing intent. His eyes became bloodshot. Clearly, he was extremely furious. He never thought that Nietion's strength had recovered to such a terrifying level. Previously, in the killing field, Nietion, Jian Jingyun, and Gue Wuzan could only barely block one of Nangongju's attack when they worked together. Now, he could easily fight against Nangongju alone. To Nangongju, this was just too strange. Nangongju, use your true strength. Otherwise, I'm afraid that you won't even know how you died. Nie Tianling smiled coldly. He stared at Nangongju provocatively. You're looking to die. Nangongju's face was so gloomy that it looked like it was about to drip blood. Then, with a flip of his palm, a long black spear appeared in his hand. In an instant, spear intent was released, and with a thrust of the spear, a 1,000-meter-long spear shadow shot towards Nie Tian. Nie Tian felt the powerful pressure, but he smiled. Then he stabbed out with his sword. The sword light shone brightly in the air, and the sword shadow shot out. What two terrifying people! When the surrounding people saw this, their eyes trembled and they cried out. Boom! In the next moment, the spear shadow and the sword shadow collided in the air. A terrifying power immediately exploded and turned into a rolling wave of air, wreaking havoc in the space. Nie Tian and Nangongju both retreated tens of meters at the same time before stabilizing themselves. Very good. That's more like it. Nie Tian smiled faintly, and his face was filled with ridicule. On the other hand, Nangongju's face was filled with anger and surprise. He never thought that Nie Tian would be able to fight him head-on and not be at a disadvantage. Although Nie Tian's strength was already at the late stage of High God, he was still weaker than Nangongju. Furthermore, Nangongju's spear art had reached the realm of selflessness, while Nie Tian was merely at the realm of sword essence. How could Nangongju contend against him? Boom, boom, boom. Nangongju was completely enraged by Nie Tian. The black spear in his hand was like a dragon, and he stabbed out 3 times. The 3 spear shadows were like raging dragons, and they crazily pressed down on Nie Tian. Young master, be careful. When Lumo Tu saw this, he couldn't help but shout, and his expression changed. On the other side, Jian Jingyun and Gue Wuchan's figures also appeared. They had also passed through layers upon layers of tests and arrived at the 8th world. At this moment, the faces of the two of them were extremely tense, and they didn't even dare to breathe loudly. They were afraid that something would happen to Nie Tian. They were also very surprised. How did Nie Tian's strength suddenly become so strong? Nie Tian looked at the 3 spear shadows in the sky with a cold and stern expression. However, he did not attack with his sword and stood on the same spot without moving. What is that kid doing? Has he been scared silly? The eyes of the crowd trembled. They were completely unable to understand Nie Tian's current action. Stinking brat, have you given up on resisting? Nangongju looked at Nie Tian, and the corner of his mouth curled into a cold smile. His expression was sinister and terrifying. It was as though he could already see the scene of Nie Tian being killed by the spear shadows. The 3 spear shadows emitted a powerful aura and pressed down on Nie Tian. At the instant when they were about to land on Nie Tian's body slightly trembled. The corner of his mouth twitched, and he muttered, "Shield of Star Soul, open." Boom! As the sound of Nie Tian's voice faded, in an instant, an endless amount of astral energy gushed out and condensed into an astral shield around his body. Armor of Star Soul, open. Immediately after, Nie Tian spoke again. Instantly, the astral energy around his body intensified and an astral giant appeared, enveloping his entire body. Bang! 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 Just at this moment, the 3 spear shadows landed heavily on the armor of Star Soul and shield of Star Soul. However, they directly shattered and turned into boundless spear intent that dissipated in the air. The sudden scene caused everyone to suck in a breath of cold air, and their expressions instantly turned sluggish. Who would have thought that Nie Tian would actually block Nangongju's powerful attack head-on? Not only was Nie Tian's attack powerful, his defense was even more shocking. How is this possible? When Nangongju saw that the 3 spear shadows that he gave his all were actually easily blocked by Nie Tian, his eyes shrunk and he screamed out in shock. Chapter 1850. Nangongju stared at Nie Tian in the air as his eyes trembled. This was the first time he felt fear in his heart. From the start, He had always treated Nietian as a little loach that he could easily crush. He had never thought that one day this little loach would be able to defy the heavens. Nietian stared at Nangong Ju, his eyes filled with killing intent. Earlier, he was only playing around with Nangong Ju. Now that he had played enough, it was time to end the game. One sword god suppressing. In the next moment, Nietian's silhouette flickered as he stabbed out with his sword. On the tip of his sword, a ball of blazing flames appeared, after which his sword intent was released as a flaming sword appeared, slashing towards Nangong Ju. This time, Nietian had infused the power of his astral soul flame into it. Under the stimulation of the astral energy, the power of his sword intent could explode forth with even greater power. In an instant, everyone felt the space around them tighten. The temperature in the air rose by several degrees, causing them to feel as though they were in a furnace. Nangong Ju stared at the flaming sword in the air. His eyes widened as the fear in his heart expanded infinitely. At this moment, he could clearly feel the aura of death closing in on him. The whistling sound of the flaming sword echoed in his ears. It was like the death knell from hell, ringing in the depths of his soul. "Don't kill me, I'm Nangong." At this moment, Nangong Ju felt despair. He had no one to fight anymore. His mouth was wide open, but he couldn't even utter the last sentence. Boom! The flaming sword was like lightning, flashing past. Nangong Ju's silhouette was instantly engulfed by the flaming sword, disappearing without a trace. Nangong Ju, the top genius of the Nangong clan, died in the hands of Nietian in the end. When Nangong Ju came to the City of Darkness, he definitely didn't expect that he would die in the hands of someone he disdained. After killing Nangong Ju with a single sword, Nietian retracted his aura as he stood in the air. Amidst the raging wind, he was like a sword god descending from the heavens. Only after a long time did the crowd react. However, their gazes were still fixed on Nietian, filled with shock. Nietian smiled faintly. His silhouette flickered, and he appeared next to Lu Montu. "Young master, you." Lu Montu looked at Nietian in shock, as if he was in a dream. "Let's talk about me later. Are you okay?" Nietian smiled faintly, his divine sense sweeping over Lu Mo's body. He found that the latter's injuries were not light, but they were not life-threatening. Nietian sent some of the power of the earth vein source into Lu Montu's body, and the latter's pale complexion immediately improved. Nietian. At this time, Jian Jingyun and Gue Wuchan's figures arrived, and they looked at Nietian with pleasantly surprised expressions. Nietian heaved a sigh of relief when he saw that everyone was fine. "Nietian, how are you so strong?" After calming down, Gue Wukan asked with a face full of doubt. Both he and Jian Jingyun were peak overgod experts with 76 blood vein seals unsealed in their bodies. However, they only possessed early-stage mid-god strength at the moment. Nietian originally possessed mid-stage high-god strength, and he should have unsealed 76 blood vein seals. Therefore, his current strength should be weaker than Jian Jingyun and Jian Jingyun. However, Nietian's current strength was that of a late-stage high god. This was very strange. Jian Jingyun was also looking at Nietian with a puzzled look on his face. Nietian didn't try to hide the truth, and said with a faint smile, "The blood seals within me have been completely lifted." "That's impossible." Jian Jingyun and Gue Wuchan cried out simultaneously. Their faces once again stiffened. Lu Motu's expression also froze. He was petrified on the spot. If Nietian's blood vein seals had been completely unsealed, the seals should have exploded by now. Nietian nodded with a smile and briefly explained what he had just experienced. In the end, he said, "I also don't know why the primal chaos energy could devour the seals." Jian Jingyun and the others were dumbfounded. They couldn't react for a long time. "I was wondering why the primal chaos vortexes suddenly disappeared. So they were absorbed by you." Gue Wuchan was the first to react. He let out a strange cry, and his face was full of shock. Nietian awkwardly smiled and said, "Let's not worry about this for now. There's no point in staying here anymore. Let's go to the 9th floor first." The primal chaos energy of the 8th floor had been completely absorbed by Nietion. The cultivators here could enter the 9th floor at any time. Nietion looked around. There were only a few hundred cultivators in the 8th floor. After all, there weren't many who could withstand the previous trials. All right, Lumo 2 nodded in agreement. He then said, I wonder how Long Outyin is doing now. With Long Outyin's strength, he should have already entered the 9th floor, said Nietion with a faint smile. He believed that Long Outyin could easily pass the 9 yuan trial. Next, Nietion and the others didn't waste any more time. They directly flew towards the space-time barrier above. In the blink of an eye, time and space changed. Nietion and the others arrived at the 9th floor. The 9th floor. Nietion stabilized his body. He looked around and found that he was in a dense forest. He observed carefully. The environment here was the same as the 1st floor. It was an ordinary world. At first glance, it didn't look any different from the outside world. This is the 9th floor? It doesn't look like a big deal, Gui Wuchan said with a faint smile as he looked around. The 9th floor is the highest floor of the Path of Slaughter. As long as you can pass through this floor, you can walk out of the Path of Slaughter. Therefore, this floor is definitely not simple, Jian Jingyun said in a serious tone. Yes. Lumo 2 nodded and said, Lord Emperor Yi said that the 9th floor's gate of slaughter only allows one cultivator to pass through. The cultivator who passes through the gate of slaughter will be the king of slaughter. Eh? When Nietion heard Lumo 2's words, he couldn't help but stare. He didn't expect that the 9th floor would only allow one person to pass through. However, this was nothing to Nietion. He had the 9 extremities. He could let others enter the 9 extremities. Then, he could enter the gate of slaughter alone. Nietion. At this time, Fat Cat's voice suddenly sounded with a trace of complacency. What's wrong? Nietion was slightly stunned. He couldn't help but ask. For Fat Cat to be so happy, it must have discovered something. Nietion, do you want to become the owner of the Path of Slaughter? Fat Cat's blue eyes flickered as he suddenly asked. What do you mean? Nietion was taken aback, his face filled with astonishment. Fat Cat smiled and said, I want to take the Path of Slaughter for myself. This. Nietion's eyes shrunk. He couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. He knew that the Path of Slaughter was a sacred tool. However, he only treated it as a test. He wholeheartedly wanted to become the king of slaughter. How would he dare to think about taking the Path of Slaughter for himself? Do you want it? Fat Cat's eyes flickered as he asked again. Nietion swallowed his saliva. The corner of his mouth moved as he spat out a word. Yes. The Path of Slaughter was a more frightening sacred tool than the glazed demon pagoda. Nietion obviously wanted to take it for himself. Chapter 1851. Fat. How can I obtain the Path of Massacre? Nietion became cold a moment later and asked with determination in his eyes. He had to admit that he was completely convinced by Fat Cat and desired the Path of Massacre very much. The Path of Massacre was a divine artifact even more terrifying than the glazed demon pagoda. Who wouldn't want it? The sacred leader, 9 Gods Calamity, was originally a nobody. However, after obtaining the glazed demon pagoda, she became a peak figure in the 9 domains. From this, one could see how powerful the glazed demon pagoda was, and the Path of Massacre was even more terrifying than the glazed demon pagoda. It won't be easy to obtain the Path of Massacre. Fat Cat withdrew her smile, and her expression became much more solemn. I'm guessing that the current owner of the Path of Massacre is the Black Lotus King who hasn't shown himself yet. For this person to be able to obtain the Path of Massacre's recognition, his strength must not be underestimated. I reckon that even if this Black Lotus King's strength is slightly inferior to 9 Gods Calamity, it shouldn't be too far off. Under such circumstances, it will be very difficult for you to obtain the Path of Massacre. Fat Cat's eyes looked at Nietion with a playful expression. Fat, just tell me directly. What should I do? Nietion smiled faintly, his expression calm and resolute. Since he had already made up his mind to obtain the Path of Massacre, why would he be afraid of difficulties? Nietion, have you really thought it through? Fat Cat looked at Nyetian with some hesitation and asked again. I have. Nyetian nodded heavily with a resolute expression. Fat Cat nodded and said, Actually, it's very simple to become the owner of the Path of Massacre. You only need to enter the 10th level of the Path of Massacre and obtain the recognition of the Slaughter Demon Sovereign's divine soul. The 10th level of the Path of Massacre? Hearing Fat Cat's words, Nyetian was stunned and said, Isn't the Path of Massacre only 9 levels? The Lumen Demontu had said that the Path of Slaughter had a total of 9 layers. Right now, Nyetian and the others were in the 9th layer. As long as they could leave the 9th layer, they would have completed the Path of Slaughter. On the surface, it seems that the Path of Massacre only has 9 levels. However, there is a 10th level hidden within the Path of Massacre. The Fat Cat smiled faintly and said, In the world of the 9th floor, there are 2 gates of slaughter. One is the exit of the Path of Slaughter. The other is the entrance to the 10th floor. There's actually such a thing. Nyetian was stunned for a moment before a faint smile appeared on his face. He had to find a hidden gate of slaughter in the 9th level. At this time, Nyetian suddenly thought of something and asked, Fat, who is the slaughtering venerable demon you mentioned just now? The Fat Cat had just said that in order to enter the 10th floor, one must obtain the recognition of the slaughtering venerable demon to become the owner of the Path of Slaughter. The slaughtering venerable demon is the creator of the Path of Slaughter. The Fat Cat nodded and said, There are actually 2 ways to become the owner of the Path of Slaughter. One is the simplest way, dripping blood, to recognize the owner. However, this must be done when the Path of Slaughter has no owner. Right now, the owner of the Path of Slaughter is the Black Lotus King, so dripping blood to recognize the owner is impossible. The second way is to enter the 10th floor and find the divine soul of the slaughtering venerable demon. The Path of Slaughter is different from other sacred tools. It doesn't have a spirit. In the past, when the slaughtering venerable demon created the Path of Slaughter, it left a divine soul in it to act as the spirit of the Path of Slaughter. However, this is only a rumor and has not been confirmed. No one has ever seen the divine soul of the slaughtering venerable demon. Hearing Till here, Nyetian's face darkened and said, What if the divine soul of the slaughtering venerable demon really doesn't exist? The Fat Cat laughed and said, Don't worry, the slaughtering venerable demon definitely exists. Although I haven't seen the divine soul of the slaughtering venerable demon, I heard this news from a powerful person. It can't be wrong. Nyetian was stunned for a moment. He was puzzled. What kind of powerful person could make the Fat Cat believe it without any doubt? Moreover, he couldn't even mention that person's name. However, he didn't think too much about it. The most important thing right now was to find the 10th floor of the Path of Slaughter. Now, Nyetian's goal had changed. He was no longer thinking about how to walk out of the Path of Slaughter. Instead, he wanted to snatch the Path of Slaughter from the Black Lotus King's hands. However, the problem was, how could he find the Path of Slaughter that led to the 10th floor? Nyetian, let's find a first Path of Slaughter first. I think that the hidden Path of Slaughter should be near the first Path of Slaughter. The Fat Cat said indifferently and confidently. All right, Nyetian nodded and agreed. Next, Nyetian let the demonic road enter the 9 superbs to recover from his injuries. Then, he let Jing Chun come out of the 9 superbs. Now that they had Jing Chun, a late-stage paramount god, by their side, they felt much safer. Nyetian observed for a moment. At this moment, they were in a vast mountain range. Based on his initial estimation, the world in front of them had a radius of several thousand meters. Jian Jingyun, can you sense the existence of the Path of Slaughter? Nyetian asked Jian Jingyun. The blood-marked seal in his body had already been devoured by the chaotic energy. He had no ability to sense the Path of Slaughter. If he wanted to find the Path of Slaughter, he would have to rely on Jian Jingyun and Gue Wuchan. Jian Jingyun carefully sensed for a moment, but he couldn't sense the existence of the Path of Slaughter. He could only shake his head. Nyetian glanced at Gue Wuchan, who also shook his head. It seems that because we just came to the 9th world, our ability to sense the Path of Slaughter is still too weak. Nietian said with a frown. Then he looked at the valley in front of them and said, "Let's go ahead and take a look. As long as we can find other warriors, we can follow them." They didn't waste any more time and advanced forward into the valley. After entering the valley, Nietian saw a few figures in front of him. He wanted to immediately chase after them. However, at this moment, his expression changed, and he immediately roared, "Be careful!" Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Just as Nietian's voice was about to fade away, whistling sounds came from the sky. The sky was filled with sharp arrows that covered the sky like a torrential rain, attacking Nietian and the others. "Young master, be careful!" Jingchen reacted quickly and roared. Then, he took a step forward and struck out with his palm. The shadow of his palm was like a mountain, going against the momentum of the void and rushing towards the sky with a loud bang. Puff, puff, puff. Those sharp arrows were very strange and powerful. They actually directly pierced through the shadow of the palm in the sky and fiercely shot down. Not good. Seeing this, Jingchen frowned and his expression changed. He obviously didn't expect that the rain of arrows in the sky would be so frightening. Under his palm, he actually couldn't block the rain of arrows. Jingchen's whole body surged with qi. Waves of mysterious energy surged around his body and condensed into a huge shield, blocking Nietian and the others. Bang, bang, bang. In the next moment, countless sharp arrows fell and heavily hit the shield around Jingchen. Unexpectedly, half of the arrows actually sank into the shield, and there were even signs of faintly penetrating the shield. Chapter 1852. How can these arrows be so strong? The defense of a late-stage paramount god is about to break. Nietian frowned, and his eyes flickered. Jingchen was a late-stage paramount god warrior, and he was of the wood attribute, so his defense was stronger than warriors of the same level. But even so, Jingchen was about to break the rain of arrows in the air, which was too strange. Something's wrong. At this time, Fat Cat screamed and said, "This is the Soul Slayer arrow. The arrow body is condensed from slaughter chi, and it can devour the power of warriors." Nietian frowned, and he used his divine sense to feel it. Sure enough, he found that the black arrow body was surging with the terrible power of runes, and it was the power that devoured Jingchen. Oh no! Realizing this, Nietian screamed in his heart, and his face darkened. The Soul Slayer arrow was indeed very scary, and it could devour the power of warriors. "Young master, leave quickly." Jingchen held on with all his might, but his face was covered with beads of sweat, but he was not afraid, and his eyes were surging with violence. Nietian frowned. At this time, how could he abandon Jingchen and leave? Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. At this time, another wave of super strong arrow rain appeared. The black arrows appeared in the air, denser than before, like a thick dark cloud, pressing down on Nietian and the others. What a terrible momentum. Although they were tens of thousands of meters away, Nietian and the others could still feel the terrible momentum of the dense rain of arrows, and they even had a feeling of suffocation. "Sakura, do it!" Nietian didn't wait any longer, and with a low roar, a sword was shot out from the nine superbs, and Sakura's figure flashed in the air. Sword skill, break mountains and rivers. Sakura directly slashed out in the air, and the sword's shadow whistled, like a wild dragon sweeping across. Puff, puff, puff. The moment the sword's shadow shot up into the sky, the terrible sword was surged out, directly smashing countless black arrows. The black arrows turned into thick black smoke in the air and directly dissipated. Seeing this, Jingchen moved and quickly retreated. "Leave!" Nietian roared in a low voice and spread open the wings on his back. He swept Jian Jingyun and Gue Wuchan up and rushed forward. Indra was in midair with sword while surging all over his body, forming a strange sword shield that wrapped around his whole body, making him completely fearless of the soul-slaying arrow. Dishir Tian was a swordsman of the legendary realm of sword and martial arts unity. The strength of his sword intent could be imagined. "You cowardly scoundrel, show yourself." Sakura looked at the void, and his gem-like eyes flickered. A trace of cold, killing intent flashed across his immature face. After a deep roar, he directly stabbed with his sword. The sword's shadow was as sharp as lightning, attacking the void. In the next moment, a strange scene occurred. Bang! The void that was originally empty suddenly shook and let out a muffled sound, as if something had been hit. "Kid, let's wait and see." Immediately, a figure appeared out of thin air and looked at Tion viciously. Then, the figure moved and left directly. "You're lucky that this sword didn't kill you." Indra smiled cold, and then his figure moved and chased after Tion and the others. Indra's figure was very fast, like a sharp sword, and he quickly caught up with Tion and the others. Tion's figure stopped, and, after confirming that there was no one around, his face relaxed a little. He looked at Jingchun and asked, "Jingchun, are you okay?" Jingchun's face was slightly pale, and he said awkwardly, "Young master, I'm fine. I didn't think that the strange black arrow would be so terrifying. The murderous aura of those black arrows is very heavy, and they have a devouring power. The strength of the person who shot them is not below yours or mine. It's not surprising that you were injured." Indra looked at Jingchun and said faintly. Tion used his divine sense to sense Jingchun's body, and after confirming that the latter was fine, he was relieved. His gaze turned to Tion and asked, "Tion, who was that person in the void just now?" "I don't know." Tion shook his head and said, "That person's strength is very strong. The rain of arrows just now was released by him, and there were other people behind him." Tion's eyes narrowed. He didn't expect that he would encounter such a terrifying expert when he just came to the 9th level. It seemed that even Tion was somewhat afraid of this person. Originally, Tion thought that with experts like Jingchun and Tion by his side, he could completely do whatever he wanted in this 9th level. But now, it seemed that the situation was much more serious than he imagined. "Fat, you just mentioned the soul-slaying arrow. What is that?" At this time, Tion thought of Fat Cat's words and couldn't help but wonder. The black arrow just now is the soul-slaying arrow. These arrows are very strange, and they're condensed from the aura of slaughter. Fat Cat's voice sounded and said, "However, the aura of slaughter is the power of the slaughter venerable demon. It seems that those people just now are not martial artists participating in the path of massacre. It is very likely that they are martial artists from Black Lotus." Tion nodded slightly, expressing his agreement. The Black Lotus King was the master of the path of massacre. It was not strange that he could grasp the aura of slaughter. Therefore, those people just now were very likely assassins arranged by the Black Lotus King. The 9th level was currently the highest level world known. In order to select the strongest king of massacre, the Black Lotus King actually arranged Black Lotus assassins. Tion let Jingchun and Tion return to the 9 extremes first. Then, he thought for a moment and decided not to care about other things first. Finding the door of massacre was the most important. Tion and the others continued forward. Along the way, they saw many corpses. There are not many martial artists who could enter the 9th level. After being massacred by the Black Lotus assassins again, those who could survive were definitely very powerful people. Just at this time, Tion suddenly heard a weak cry for help, causing him to frown involuntarily. "Follow me." Tion did not hesitate. His figure moved, flashing towards the place where the cry for help came from. The figure sprinted for several thousand meters. Tion saw a figure running for his life in the distance. His complexion was deathly pale. Clearly, he suffered a tremendous fright. "It's this guy." When Tion saw that figure's face clearly, his gaze involuntarily trembled. He recognized this person. It was actually Qianfun. Previously, when entering the door of massacre in the 1st level world, Tion borrowed Qianfun's strength and had a small conflict with the latter. He did not expect that he would actually encounter Qianfun here again. "Save me, quickly save me." Qianfun was running wildly when he suddenly saw Tion. His eyes were filled with pleasant surprise as he shouted loudly. However, at this time, A berserk voice came from the void, shouting wildly, "Don't be naive. The massacre has already begun. No one can save you." When the voice fell, a black-clothed figure appeared. A ruthless palm smacked out ruthlessly, slapping down towards Qin Fun. Qin Fun's injuries were very severe. If this palm landed, he would die without a doubt. Chapter 1853. Boom! In the void, the palm's shadow and the sword's shadow collided. The space shook violently, and the two forces dissipated in the void. Qin Fun reacted very quickly. He pushed off the ground and rushed several hundred meters away, saving his life in the end. It's you." Qin Fun stabilized himself and took a few steps forward, arriving beside Nie Tian. Only then did he see Nie Tian's face clearly. His expression could not help but change. It was filled with fright and surprise. "Don't be nervous. I'm not your enemy." Nie Tian smiled faintly and signaled Qin Fun to hide behind him. At this moment, the black-clothed figure landed. He stared at Nie Tian viciously and growled, "Damn brat, are you bold enough to save people with your strength?" "I've already saved them." Nie Tian smiled faintly and said in an extremely provocative manner, "You're from Black Lotus, aren't you?" Nie Tian could sense that the black-clothed person did not have the presence of the Blood Rune seal, so he was not a cultivator who had participated in the path of slaughter. As a result, he could only be from Black Lotus. "Brat, you're rather smart. It's a pity that what you did was very stupid." The black-clothed person smiled coldly and said, "Since you've saved people, I'll kill you as well today." With that, the black-clothed person's eyes turned cold, and he directly struck out. He struck out with his palm, and countless palm blurs appeared in the air, crushing towards Nie Tian and the others. Nie Tian's lips twitched when he saw this. He said coldly, "Do you still want to kill people with just a few tricks?" The black-clothed person was not weak. He was a late over-god, but it was a pity that he underestimated Nie Tian. He actually used a useless move right from the start. He wanted to kill Nie Tian and the others with his palm blurs. "I'll take your life with this strike." Nie Tian let out a low roar and slashed out with the Starlight Heaven Slash. It was a desolate sword that was swift and fierce to the extreme. An ear-piercing sword cry resounded in the air. The next moment, the palm shadows that filled the sky were torn apart by the sword will, and the black-robed figure was directly sent flying. He howled in pain in the air, and when he landed, he left a bloody mark on the ground. His body twitched a few times, and then there was no more movement. Nie Tian had directly slain a late over-god with a single strike. Besides the fact that his sword intent was too strong, it was also because this black-clothed man was too careless and didn't take Nie Tian to be an opponent at all. The price of carelessness was only one word: death. Seeing that Nie Tian killed the man in black with one strike, Qin Fun couldn't help but take a deep breath. His eyes were trembling, and he couldn't say a word. He couldn't understand how Nie Tian could be so strong. "Qin Fun, if you want to live, you'd better come with me." Nie Tian looked at Qin Fun and said with a faint smile. His impression of Qin Fun wasn't too bad. Qin Fun wasn't weak, and his true strength should be that of an early paramount god. Qin Fun was stunned. Nie Tian's tone was completely like that of a superior, and he couldn't accept it. He was a mighty paramount god, but he had to bow down to Nie Tian. Of course, he felt uncomfortable. "Since you don't want to live, then leave." Nie Tian smiled slightly, and his entire body radiated a domineering confidence, as if Qin Fun would definitely die if he left. After saying that, Nie Tian turned around and left. Jian Jingyun and the others hurried to follow. "I'll go with you." Qin Fun was stunned for a moment, but he immediately reacted and ran over. "That's a smart guy." Nie Tian laughed, and Qin Fun blushed. Nie Tian wasn't bluffing. If Qin Fun left by himself, he definitely wouldn't be able to survive. Qin Fun also knew that, so he chose to follow behind Nie Tian. Then, they walked forward while chatting. After a while, Nie Tian suddenly stopped, as if he had noticed something. "Mr. Nie, what's wrong?" Qin Fun already knew Nie Tian's name, but he didn't dare to call him by his full name. He was very nervous. afraid that he would run into more assassins from the Black Lotus sect. The others were also nervous. Who knew how many assassins from the Black Lotus sect were hiding in the 9th level? Over there. Nietion's eyes flashed. He pointed in a direction and said, "There's the sound of fighting." Fighting? Qin Feng's face stiffened. He turned around and walked in another direction. He didn't want to get involved in other people's fights. "Let's go and take a look." Nietion was excited. He moved and directly flew over. Jian Jingyun and Gue Wuchan followed closely behind Nietion. Qin Feng was stunned again, and his face turned ugly. But he still followed Nietion and the others. Tens of thousands of meters away from Nietion and the others, in a huge valley, dozens of martial artists in black were scattered in the valley. Dozens of corpses of martial artists in black were under their feet, and in the middle of them was a giant dragon that was thousands of meters long. This was a real dragon. Its flesh and blood were real. But at this moment, this giant dragon was covered in wounds. Its flesh was twisted and blood was dripping. It was a ghastly sight. Who is this kid? How can he dragon eyes? The eyes of the group of martial artists in black flickered and trembled. They were originally chasing a person, but in the end, the person they were chasing turned into a giant dragon. This scene was truly unimaginable. Brothers, this kid can't hold on any longer. Let's attack together and kill him. At this time, one of the martial artists in black roared and was the first to attack. He punched fiercely, and a huge fish shadow like a mountain smashed towards the giant dragon. Roar! The giant dragon roared, and its huge body suddenly turned over. It swung its tail and immediately released a huge force. The fish shadow was directly destroyed, and the martial artist in black was slapped away. He was deeply embedded in the wall of the valley, and it was unknown whether he was dead or alive. Fuck, this kid is going crazy again. A martial artist in black roared, and a huge blade appeared in his hand. He fiercely slashed out, and a terrifying blade shadow blasted towards the giant dragon, leaving a bloody wound on its body. Roar! The huge dragon's body was in pain, and it let out a strange cry. However, it was exceptionally ferocious. Its huge body rushed over, and its dragon claws ruthlessly slammed down. Cold light flickered, and several sharp blades fell down. The black-clothed man who attacked was actually cut into several pieces. When the other martial artists in black saw this, they all sucked in a breath of cold air, and they couldn't help but retreat subconsciously. At this time, Nietion and the others finally reached the outside of the valley, and they could clearly see what was happening in the valley from afar. Fuck, am I seeing things? That's a divine dragon. Qin Feng shouted from afar, and his face was full of astonishment. How is this possible? Didn't the divine dragon clan go extinct a long time ago? Gue Wukan also shouted, and he also couldn't believe the scene in front of him. Jian Jingyun's reaction was considered normal, but he still couldn't hide the shock on his face. Nietion looked at it from afar, and he was stunned at first. Then his expression changed, and the blood in his body instantly flowed in reverse. A terrifying aura surged, and he finally shouted a name. Nine Seals Real Dragon. Nine Seals Real Dragon. The giant dragon in the valley was the Nine Seals Real Dragon. Chapter 1854. The Nine Seal, True Dragon, Long Out Yin. Nietion confirmed the true identity of the dragon in the valley. How could he not be furious when he saw the bloodied body of the dragon? Nietion, what's wrong? Jian Jingyun could not help but ask in surprise when he sensed that something was wrong with Nietion's presence. However, Nietion didn't pay any attention to Jian Jingyun. Instead, his aura surged as he unleashed terrifying magical symbols. Like a wild beast, he charged into the mountain valley. Has he gone mad? Qin Feng cried out when he saw this. His throat even went numb. Never had he thought that Nietion would just charge over like this. He admitted that Nietion was very powerful, but there were several dozen black-clothed cultivators in the valley, as well as a real dragon. Was Nietion not looking to die by charging over like this? However, Qin Feng's expression changed in the next moment. he suddenly discovered that Nie Tion's presence had actually skyrocketed rapidly. His strength had increased to late over God in a strange manner. How is this possible? Qin Fen was stunned. He was extremely certain that Nie Tian had been a late over God earlier. How had he become a late over God in the blink of an eye? This was just too strange. Nie Tian did not care at all when he saw that Long Out Yin was in danger. He directly unleashed the 3 talismans. Before, he could raise his strength to late over God when he unleashed the 3 talismans. Now that his strength had increased, it was still only that of a late over God. The grade of the talismans did not increase, so it was rather difficult for Nie Tian to increase his strength again. However, Nie Tian's strength as a late over God was more than enough to deal with the black-clothed cultivators. Where did this damn brat come from? Are you looking to die? At this moment, a black-clothed cultivator noticed Nie Tian. His face sank as he roared out furiously. You're the one who's looking to die. Nie Tian's expression was cold and murderous. He did not hesitate to stab out with his sword. The sword image whistled out and took the life of the black-clothed cultivator. Nie Tian was so strong that he could instantly kill an early paramount god. The black-robed man was only a late lord god, so there was no way he could survive a single blow from Nie Tian. This sudden scene stunned the other black-clothed cultivators. For a moment, they could not react. All of you will die today. Nie Tian roared angrily. His figure moved like lightning as he sent out several sword strikes. After several sword images landed, several black-clothed cultivators died miserably on the spot. Nie Tian was too strong. At this time, he was like a tiger that had entered a flock of sheep, fierce and unstoppable. Only now did these black-clothed cultivators react. Their faces were filled with shock as they shouted, "This boy's strength is strange. Everyone, attack together and exterminate him." Yes. Dozens of black-clothed cultivators responded in unison and immediately attacked. Boom, boom, boom. These black-clothed cultivators had a very high level of rapport with each other. When they joined forces, they were able to fuse their power perfectly, and their attacks were strong enough to pose a threat to a mid-paramount god. Boom! A terrifying pressure descended, and yet Tian felt as if Mount Tai were crushing down on him. However, he was not afraid. His eyes were bloodshot, and he was filled with the desire to fight. Sword sealing hexing formation, Sword Dragon devours the world. Nie Tian roared, and all of his blood energy surged out, transforming into terrifying spell formation runes that pushed the sword will around him to the limit. In the next moment, a sword shadow appeared. It was a huge sword dragon that soared into the sky. Its terrifying aura shook the heavens and the earth. Wow! Qin Fen was completely shocked by what he saw. He couldn't imagine how Nie Tian was able to release such a terrifying power. He was an early paramount god, and even if he were at the peak of his strength, there was no way he could block Nie Tian's sword. Roar! The sword dragon roared into the sky, and the dragon's might surged out, tyrannically withstanding the combined pressure of the dozens of black-clothed cultivators. Immediately, surging waves of qi exploded in the air, hitting the cliffs around the valley. The surrounding mountains shook violently, and the entire mountain was on the verge of collapse. Nie Tian frowned, and then he moved. He stretched out his hand, and an enormous amount of star energy surged out, wrapping the 9-seal true dragon up and sending it out of the valley. Jian Jingyun and Gue Wushan hurried over to catch the 9-seal true dragon. Only now did Qin Fen realize that Nie Tian had rushed into the valley to save the dragon. At this moment, the 9-seal true dragon was on the verge of death. Its huge body trembled, but it was unable to return to its human form. Jian Jingyun, Gue Wushan, and Qin Fen worked together to move the 9-seal true dragon tens of thousands of meters away. Rumble! At this moment, a huge explosion sounded out, and the valley completely collapsed. The mountain collapsed, and in an instant, the valley was filled up. Waves of soil rose up from the ground and spread in all directions. Nie Tian, when Jian Jingyun and Gue Wushan saw the scene in the valley, they simultaneously cried out in alarm, and their eyes started to tremble. Bang! Before the two of them could finish shouting, a figure soared into the sky and stood towering in midair like a sharp sword. It was Nietian. Damn, he's so strong. Chinfen looked at Nietian in shock. Only now did he realize that Nietian's strength was so strong. Nietian flew out from the ruins of the mountain. As for the other black-clothed cultivators, they were all buried under the mountain. The huge mountain was tens of thousands of meters tall, and the pressure was so great that even a Lord God couldn't bear it. Nietian looked at the pile of stones under his feet, and then moved to Jian Jingyun and the others. Long Out Yin. When Nietian saw that the Nine Seals' true dragon had fainted and its aura was becoming weaker, he couldn't help but cry out in grief. Jian Jingyun and the others watched from the side, and they didn't dare to say anything. They didn't know the relationship between Nietian and the giant dragon in front of them. Nietian didn't waste any time. He activated the demonic ether in his body, and the Pterosaurus released a huge amount of life energy, which frantically flowed into the Nine Seals' true dragon's body. The Nine Seals' true dragon's body was too big, and it needed a lot of life energy. After a while, cold sweat appeared on Nietian's forehead, and his face was slightly pale. But at this time, he felt that the Nine Seals' true dragon's aura had stabilized, and it was gradually becoming stronger. After a while, the Nine Seals' true dragon finally woke up. Its two huge eyes opened, and the moment it saw Nietian, they couldn't help but flicker. Then, the giant dragon's body suddenly shrank, and it finally returned to its human form. Big brother, it's really you. Long Out Yin stood up and looked at Nietian in disbelief. After confirming that Long Out Yin was fine, Nietian let out a long sigh of relief and smiled faintly. It's really me. The current Long Out Yin looked much younger than a few years ago, and his aura was much sharper and more domineering. Jian Jingyun and the others were dumbfounded. They were completely shocked by the scene in front of them, and they couldn't speak for a long time. Long Out Yin had suddenly turned into a human, and he even called Nietian Big Brother. What was going on? Nietian smiled faintly, and then he introduced Long Out Yin to everyone. Chapter 1855. Nietian was taken aback. He looked up into the sky, and his eyes trembled. His eyes locked onto the black-robed cultivator. When had the latter appeared, he scanned the black-robed cultivator with his divine sense, and was shocked to find that this person was a late-stage paramount god. Kid, you're the god-fiend nascent embryo, right? The black-robed cultivator smiled cold, and said with a playful expression, Your strength is indeed strange. That attack just now was indeed powerful. I was stunned. You're from the Black Lotus? Nietian's eyes narrowed slightly, but he quickly calmed down and asked, What's the point of knowing too much for someone who's about to die? The black-robed cultivator smiled coldly, his eyes surging with killing intent. Godfiend nascent embryo, the most amazing thing about you is that you actually broke the blood vein seal. For hundreds of thousands of years, no one has ever broken the blood vein seal. You're the first. The path of slaughter had been going on for hundreds of thousands of years, but Nietian was the only one to break the blood vein seal. You're one of the 12 Black Lotus Lords, right? Nietian ignored the black-robed cultivator's words and asked again, It seems that you really want to know who I am. The black-robed cultivator's eyes flickered, and then he laughed. It's not strange for a person to want to die knowing. Since that's the case, I might as well tell you a few things. I'm all ears, Nietian said with a calm expression. This black-robed cultivator was very arrogant, as if he was completely confident that he could kill Nietian. But Nietian had his own trump cards, so he wasn't afraid of the black-robed cultivator. Godfiend nascent embryo kid, you guessed correctly. I'm indeed one of the 12 Lotus Lords. I'm the 8th Lotus Lord. The 8th Lotus Lord's lips curled into a cold smile. You killed a Lotus Lord in the Dark Mountain Range. That person was the 9th Lotus Lord. With your strength, you couldn't have killed the 9th Lotus Lord, so I'm guessing that you have other experts with you, right? As he spoke, The 8 Lotus Master raised his eyebrows in a provocative manner. Yes. Nietian was stunned at first, but then he nodded. It seemed like the 8 Lotus Lord was a smart man. Since he knew that Nietian had experts by his side, yet he still dared to appear so brazenly, it meant that he was prepared. To be able to kill Ninth Bro, I'm curious to see just what kind of divine being this person is. The 8 Lotus Master chuckled as his eyes turned incomparably strange. Don't worry, you'll see it soon enough. Nietan faintly smiled and changed the topic. However, I still have a few questions that I don't understand. I'm sure you'll answer them. I am a soft-hearted person. I will not reject the request of someone who is about to die. The 8 Lotus Master smiled faintly, but his expression was extremely cold. It was as if Nietian was already a dead man in his eyes. Nietian faintly smiled and said, I have a question that I don't understand. Why did the Black Lotus King want to kill me at first, then suddenly stop? The 8 Lotus Master frowned, as if he hadn't expected Nietian to ask this question. However, after thinking for a moment, he laughed and said, I shouldn't answer this question, but since you are about to die, there's no harm in knowing the truth. The reason why Lord Black Lotus King wants to kill you is because he feels threatened by you. As for why he suddenly stopped, it was because your demon origin embryo was a key. At this point, the 8 Lotus Masters paused and didn't continue. Key? What key? Nietian was stunned for a moment and couldn't help but ask. Of course, the key is used to open the door. The 8 Lotus Master laughed and said, However, you don't need to know where this door leads to. Open the door? The corner of Nietian's mouth twitched as he thought of something. His eyes trembled slightly, and he laughed strangely. It's the key to open the gate of slaughter, and that gate of slaughter leads to the 10th floor of the path of slaughter, right? The 8 Lotus Master's expression darkened when he heard Nietian's words. His expression clearly said, How did you know? The 10th floor of the path of slaughter was the greatest secret of the path of slaughter. Only the Black Lotus King knew about it, and the 8 Lotus Master only knew about it from the Black Lotus King. What was strange was that Nietian actually knew about the 10th floor as well. Nietian's guess was correct. The demon origin embryo was the key to opening the 10th floor of the path of slaughter. This was why the Black Lotus King suddenly stopped killing Nietian and tried to find a way to get him to enter the path of slaughter. As long as Nietian died in the path of slaughter, the Black Lotus King could use the path of slaughter to absorb Nietian's demon origin energy and open the 10th floor. As the current owner of the path of slaughter, the Black Lotus King naturally knew about the existence of the 10th floor. However, he had never been able to open it. Nietian's appearance gave him hope. So that's how it is. Nietian smiled faintly, finally understanding everything. Stinking brat, I've asked all that I need to ask. Do you have any last words? The 8 Lotus Master was a little nervous. Nietian knew more than he had imagined. He didn't dare to be careless anymore. He had to kill Nietian. I still have one more question. Why are you so confident that you can kill me? Nietian faintly smiled as he looked at the 8 Lotus Master. The person behind you will answer this question. The 8 Lotus Master smiled coldly as the killing intent in his eyes intensified. Nietian's eyes narrowed as he looked behind him. He realized that a black-robed figure had appeared in the void. A pair of cold eyes was staring at him with a venomous gaze. This black-robed man's aura was very strong. The aura around him was as vast as the mountains and as vast as the seas. Without a doubt, this was another Lotus Master. So you have helpers. Nietian frowned as he realized that the 8 Lotus Masters had helpers. No wonder they were so confident. However, Nietian was still very calm. Even if the 8 Lotus Masters had helpers, he wasn't afraid. After all, he had 2 strong cultivators by his side, Dishir Tian and Jingchun. There's more than one helper. At this moment, the void trembled slightly as a cold voice sounded. Another black-robed figure appeared. Nietian's eyes widened and his face darkened. He exclaimed in his heart, Another Lotus Master. He really didn't expect that there would be 3 Lotus Masters here at the same time. No wonder the 8 Lotus Masters were so confident and treated Nietian like a dead man. It turned out that he had 2 strong helpers. Young man, tell the strong cultivator behind you to come out. I want to see who killed my ninth brother, the 8 Lotus Master said in a low voice. He took a step forward and the chi in his body surged. Nietion's eyes widened in surprise as he glanced at Long Outyin and the others. The 9 extremities appeared in his hand, and he said, "You guys hide inside first." The 9 extremities spun slightly, and a space-time aura appeared. Long Outyin and the others entered the 9 extremities. Chapter 1856. Nietion let Long Outyin and the others enter the 9 extremities world, which made him feel much more at ease. With that, he had nothing to worry about. The 8 Lotus Lords frowned at the sudden disappearance of the people around Nietion, and then the appearance of 2 experts. "Stinking brat, it looks like you have some treasures on you." Nietion stared at the 8 Lotus Lords and said, "Even if I have treasures, you'll have to be able to snatch them. The fiend god Nascent Embryo is truly arrogant." The 8 Lotus Lords sneered, then locked their gazes on Sakura Heaven. He could sense that this kid was the biggest threat. "Jing Chun, protect Nietion. Leave these 3 to me." Sakura Heaven's eyes flashed like black gems, and his jade-like face was filled with cold, killing intent. "You're talking big, you little bastard." The 8 Lotus Lords sneered, then moved to attack first. Although Tion looked like a 6-year-old child, the 8 Lotus Lords did not dare to be careless at all. Their first move was an all-out attack. Their aura surged violently as they struck out with their palms. In the void, a black blade appeared. It was so sharp that it seemed like it could split the heavens and the earth. It flew straight towards Tion. Sword technique, Sea Splitter. Tion held the heaven-slaughtering sword in his hand, and the corner of his mouth trembled as he muttered. He swung his sword wildly, and the shadow of the sword was like a mountain, rumbling and mighty. Bang! In the next moment, a muffled sound filled the air as the 2 forces collided and exploded, sending shockwaves out in all directions. The 8 Lotus Lords shuddered and retreated several hundred meters before they managed to stabilize themselves. They looked at Sakura Heaven in shock. He didn't expect that Tion's strength was actually so tyrannical. He had never seen such a swift and fierce sword intent in his life. Fortunately, Sakura Heaven only had the strength of an early-stage paramount god. If he had been a bit stronger, the 8 Lotus Lords wouldn't have been able to take a single blow from him. 11th brother, this little bastard's sword is too strong. Let's attack together. The 8 Lotus Head regained his composure as he looked at the other black-robed man and spoke in a low voice. The black-robed man did not reply. Instead, his figure flashed and arrived beside the 8 Lotus Lords. He was prepared to fight Tion 2 against 1. Sakura's eyes were as calm as a cold pond. His whole body surged with a sharp, killing intent, and he was not afraid in the slightest. Jing Chun watched from the side and did not leave Nietion's side. He had to protect Nietion's safety. Kill. At this time, the 8 Lotus Lords and 11 Lotus Lords simultaneously let out a low roar and instantly made their moves. 2 majestic energies gushed out and actually fused together in the air, transforming into a black lotus petal. The black lotus petal emitted a sinister and eerie aura as it pressed toward Sakura. "Be careful." When Nietion saw this, his heart sank and his expression changed. Even though they were tens of thousands of meters away, Nietion still felt a terrible pressure, which made him worry for Sakura. Sword fire! Sakura's small body stood tall in the sky. The heaven-slaughtering sword in his hand drew a semicircle in the air. Immediately, boundless sword intent surged out. A line of fire whizzed out and transformed into a flaming sword in the air, burning the entire sky. Rumble! Chi chi chi! The black lotus and the flaming sword collided in the air. The sword intent and the power of darkness crumbled at the same time, and ear-piercing sounds came from the void. Bang! Bang! Immediately, 2 muffled sounds rang out. 2 black-robed figures were actually directly sent flying, drawing 2 black trails in the air. When Nietion and Jing Chun saw this scene, They couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. The two figures that were sent flying were the 8 Lotus Lords and 11 Lotus Lords. Sakura was too strong. Even when fighting 1 against 2, he still had the upper hand. What a frightening little baby. The 8 Lotus Lords and 11 Lotus Lords stabilized their bodies. Their whole bodies were dripping with fresh blood. 2 pairs of cold eyes stared at Sakura, surging with vicious, killing intent. How could the two of them have imagined that a little baby that looked only a few years old was actually so frightening? However, the current Sakura also suffered some injuries. Blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. Fighting head-on with 2 great Lotus Lords was also a huge challenge for Sakura. Old 10. The figures of the 8 Lotus Lords and 11 Lotus Lords moved and confronted Sakura. At the same time, they growled and looked at the black-robed man on the other side. On the other side, the black-robed man moved, and the 3 great Lotus Lords stood together. Oh no! Seeing this scene, Nietion's gaze slightly narrowed, and he cried out in his heart. He could see that Sakura facing 2 great Lotus Lords at the same time was already his limit. If he were to face 3 great Lotus Lords alone, it would be too forceful. Sakura's Sword Dao strength was already at the peak of the God Realm Sword Dao, but his weakness was too obvious. His strength was weak, and most importantly, his martial body was too weak. Sakura's battle strength was too greatly restricted by his martial body, and it even affected the performance of his sword intent. Jing Chun. Nietion looked at Jing Chun, indicating the latter to make a move. Young lord, I can't leave your side. But Jing Chun didn't move an inch, and he said solemnly, I must protect young lord's safety. During this period of time, Jing Chun and Sakura stayed together in the 9 Superbs and had already become friends. Of course, he wanted to make a move to help Sakura, but to him, protecting Nietion was more important than anything else. Nietion, don't come over. At this time, Sakura's voice suddenly sounded, and then he actually transmitted his voice to Nietion and Jing Chun, saying, Be careful behind you. Nietion and Jing Chun were suddenly stunned, and they immediately exchanged glances. Only then did they react. Turns out there was still an expert lying in ambush behind them. In order to kill Nietion, the Black Lotus King sent out an extremely powerful force. Apart from the 3 great Lotus Lords, there was actually still someone else. No wonder the 8 Lotus Lord were so confident that they could kill Nietion. It turned out that the strength behind them was terrifyingly strong. At this time, Jing Chun became nervous, and sweat seeped out of his forehead. He didn't doubt Sakura's words, but he couldn't sense the existence of the person lying in ambush at all. Nietion also couldn't sense anything. Even if he activated the holographic divine patterns, he still couldn't find the person lying in ambush. Sakura possessed the legendary realm of sword and martial arts as one, and his sword intent was already sharp to the extreme. It was very normal for his perception to be above Nietion's. Fat. At this time, Nietion thought of Fat Cat and shouted, but the latter didn't have any reaction. Nietion was very baffled. Ever since the 3 great Lotus Lords appeared, Fat Cat actually didn't make any movements. This wasn't like his style. Nietion looked inside the Fiend God Origin embryo and suddenly discovered that Fat Cat's body was surrounded by a 7-colored glazed radiance. On its fat claws, there was a sparkling and translucent crystal ball of light. It was actually a glazed crystal. The glazed crystal was brought out by the Fat Cat from the glazed demon pagoda when Nietion brought him out. The aura of the Fiend God Origin embryo in Nietion's body was concealed by the glazed crystal, so ordinary people couldn't tell that he was a Fiend God Origin embryo. Chapter 1857. In the space of the Origin embryo, Fat Cat ignored Nietion and focused all his attention on the glazed crystal. Little Fat Cat activated the glazed crystal, and waves of glazed chi were released, condensing into glazed runes that circulated in the air, looking extremely dazzling. Nietion frowned. He still didn't know what Fat Cat was trying to do. And at this moment, the figures of the 3 Lotus Masters moved. Little boy, You are the first person to make 3 of the 12 Lotus Masters of the Black Lotus join hands. The 8 Lotus heads smiled cold. Killing intent flashed in their eyes as they slapped out with their palms. Dark energy filled the air and the sky darkened. At the same time, the 10-11 Lotus heads made their moves as well. Similarly, a terrifying dark energy merged with the 8 Lotus heads. The power of the 12 Lotus heads was of the same attribute. Furthermore, they worked well with each other. Boom! In the next moment, a black lotus appeared in the air. Like a huge black mountain, it covered the sky and the earth and formed a substantial pressure. The space was pulled taut by the huge force, as if it was going to be torn apart in the next moment. Oh no! Nietian could not help but frown as he felt the enormous pressure coming from the void. He exclaimed inwardly. He could sense that the attack this time was several times more powerful than the combined attack of the 2 Lotus Masters. Could Dishur Tian block such a terrifying attack? Dishur Tian stood tall like a sharp sword. His eyes were bloodthirsty and fearless. In the next moment, his silhouette moved slightly. Instantly, an endless amount of sword chi rose like the mountains and the seas. An endless amount of sword chi shot up into the sky, like a pillar that stood between the sky and the earth. Sword technique, wind. Dishur Tian's eyes flashed as he spat out a few words. Then his sword chi condensed, and an extremely sharp sword shadow appeared. It whizzed out like a rainbow and attacked. So strong. In an instant, Nietian felt the terrifying sword chi. He couldn't help but frown, and his expression changed. Sakura was indeed worthy of being a swordsman of the legendary realm of sword and martial arts as one. He was actually able to change the attribute of sword intent at will. In the previous sword strike, Sakura used fire. In the current sword strike, he used wind. Sakura was very smart and had an extremely high fighting talent. He knew that his sword intent was restricted by his martial physique, and he could not unleash its full potential. Thus, if he wanted to face the 3 Lotus Lords head-on, he would undoubtedly be at a great disadvantage. Therefore, he chose a smarter method, using speed to defeat strength. For this sword, Sakura gave up on the grandeur of the sword intent and focused on the speed of the sword intent. The sword intent turned into wind and pushed the speed to the extreme. Dishur Tian was an ancient powerhouse who had lived for hundreds of thousands of years. He had experienced countless fierce battles in his life, so one could well imagine how rich his combat experience was. To be able to make such a choice under such circumstances was not surprising. Pooh! The sword's shadow was like lightning, swift and fierce to the extreme, and it actually directly pierced through the huge black lotus. Not good. Following which, a cry rang out in the sky as the sharp sword shadow shot straight towards the 11 Lotus Masters. 11th. The 8 and 10 Lotus Masters cried out at the same time, but it was already too late. Sakura's sword shadow was too fast, and there was no time to react. Bang! With a muffled sound, the figures of the 11 Lotus Masters flew out. They were still in midair when they were directly drowned by the sword intent and died, tragically, without leaving a corpse. This. When Nietian saw this scene, he could not help but suck in a breath of cold air, and his eyes trembled incessantly. However, at this moment, the black lotus in the sky fell down heavily, causing the heaven and earth to tremble. Sakura wanted to escape, but his body was restricted by the huge pressure, and his speed was very slow. Rumble! The black lotus fell, and Sakura's figure was actually drowned. Sakura! When Nietian saw this, he cried out in alarm, and his figure moved, rushing over madly. Bang! At this moment, a sword intent soared into the sky, and a bloody figure appeared. It was Sakura. At the last moment of crisis, Sakura had struck out with his sword, breaking through the black lotus and saving his life. Nya, Tian. Although Sakura was still alive, he was gravely injured. His body trembled, and he found it difficult to stand. Nietian flew over and opened the 9 Ultimates gate for Sakura to enter. In this battle, Sakura had gone all out, and in the end, he had killed the 11 Lotus Masters and seriously injured the 8 and 10 Lotus Masters. Such a result was enough to show how terrifying his battle prowess was. But unfortunately, Dishur Tion's injuries were also very serious. Coupled with his weak martial body, it was estimated that he would need to rest for at least half a month or even a month to recover. It had to be said that Sakura's final sword strike had used speed to break through strength, and it was truly breathtaking. In a completely disadvantageous situation, he was still able to kill one person without dying. After all, Sakura was only an early-stage Paramount God. Damn it! When the 8 and 10 Lotus Masters saw that Nietian had recalled Sakura, they couldn't help but fly into a rage. Not only had the 3 Lotus Masters failed to kill Sakura, but one of them had even been killed by him. It was a huge humiliation. The heads of the 8 and 10 Lotuses stared at Nietian, their eyes filled with intense killing intent. Nietian looked back at the 8 and 10 Lotus Masters without the slightest bit of fear. Nietian had a strong temperament, and no matter what kind of enemy he faced, he was fearless. Nietian, be careful. However, at this moment, Little Fat Cat's voice suddenly rang out, crying out in panic. Nietian was taken aback. He immediately turned around to look at the void. A huge black arrow had appeared in the sky. Its aura surged like the ninth heaven's profound thunder. With a loud rumble, it actually pressed down on him. Soul Slayer arrow. Nietian sensed that something was wrong, and his eyes trembled. He wanted to flee, but to his surprise, he found himself completely immobilized by a powerful pressure. Prepare to die, you stinking brat, the 8 and 10 Lotus Masters said with a sinister smile. The combined pressure of the 8 and 10 Lotus Masters was enough to immobilize Nietian. Young Lord, standing less than 100 meters away from Nietian, Jing Chun let out a thunderous roar as he blurred into motion and unleashed his raging power. Tens of thousands of thorns appeared in the air and rapidly condensed into a shield that was thousands of meters wide. Boom! The next moment, the Soul Slayer arrow fell from the sky and directly penetrated the thorny shield. Countless thorns exploded in the air, and the whole area was in a mess. Jing Chun trembled violently, unable to withstand the immense pressure of the Soul Slayer arrow. Bloody wounds opened up all over his body, and blood flowed out of them. Upon seeing this, Nietian's eyes flickered violently as he exclaimed, Jing Chun, young lord, don't worry about me. Hurry up and leave. Jing Chun shouted, his face twisted with rage as he urged Nietian to leave. Azure Forbidden World, activate. At this moment, the little fat cat's voice sounded again. Then, a 7-colored glazed light surged out of Nietian's body and surrounded him, forming a glazed armor around his body. Chapter 1858. Nietian was taken aback by the sudden turn of events and didn't know how to react. Nietian, go save him, shouted the fat cat. Nietian finally moved. Wings of astral soul appeared on his back, and he flew towards Jing Chun. Boom! The black soul slaying arrow pressed down violently, and a huge pressure descended on Jing Chun's body, almost crushing his body. At the moment of life and death, Nietian appeared. He flapped his wings and pulled Jing Chun towards him. The 9 extremities opened, and Jing Chun entered the 9 extremities. Nietian moved very quickly. He dodged the soul-slaying arrow and stood in the void thousands of meters away. He stared coldly at the 8 Lotus Lords and the others. At this moment, a black-robed man appeared in the sky. His aura was vigorous and vast. He was even stronger than the 8 Lotus Lords. It's you. Nietian turned to look at the black-robed man. He immediately recognized him as the person who had attacked them in the valley. He had been forced out by Sakura. This black-robed man was also one of the 12 Lotus Lords. He was the 6th Lotus Lord. What kind of power are you using? The 6th Lotus Lord's body sank slightly as he stared coldly at Nietian. At this moment, the 6th Lotus Lord sensed an extremely terrifying aura from Nietian. He actually felt threatened. Do you need to know? Replied Nietian coldly. In fact, he also did not know what kind of power the glazed boundary that had appeared around him was. It turned out that the fat cat had been silent all this while. She had activated the power of the glazed origin crystal just for this moment. Nietion, this is the power contained in the glazed origin crystal. I will convert this power into glazed runes to open the glazed boundary. The fat cat explained, as long as you are in the glazed boundary, you can use the power of the glazed origin crystal. Nietion nodded slightly. He was shocked when he felt the power of the glazed origin crystal in the glazed boundary. Under the Valyrian barrier, he felt like his strength had increased by countless times. Although he was still a late high god, his presence was even more terrifying than peak over gods. The Forbidden Glass world wasn't big. It was like a layer of runic armor that wrapped around Nietion's body. Nietion, the colored glaze Forbidden World won't last much longer. Finish them off as soon as possible. The fat cat said in a deep voice. His face was as pale as paper. It was obvious that activating the colored glaze Forbidden Boundary was a heavy burden on him. Fine. Nietion indifferently smiled. After that, his body trembled as terrifying forbidden runes gushed out from his body. Black Forbidden Technique runes circulated outside the colored glass Forbidden Barrier, and Nietion's aura began to skyrocket. The sixth Lotus Head could sense that Nietion's aura was rising rapidly. He couldn't help but frown as his face darkened. He looked at the 8th and 10th Lotus Heads and said in a cold voice, "Do it. Damn brat, I'll kill you." The 10th Lotus Head was rather impulsive. He was eager to avenge the 11th Lotus Head, so he roared out furiously and slammed down with his palm. A black claw swiped at Nietion. Nietion's presence was like the sea. His strength had skyrocketed to laid-over god, but his presence was boundless. It was much more powerful than before. "You're looking to die." Nietion suddenly raised his head and looked at the 10th Lotus Head. His eyes sank, and a cold voice rang out from his throat. Afterwards, he struck out with his sword. The sword roared as it lunged out like a huge beast. Boom! The black claw and the huge sword collided in the air. There was a great rumble, and waves of air immediately exploded. Arg! Afterwards, there was a miserable howl, and the 10th Lotus Head was blown away. He was still in the air, but he could no longer endure the pressure of the sword intent. He directly exploded into a blood-red light. 10th brother. The sight of the bloody scene caused the 6th and 8th Lotus Masters to be taken aback, following which they cried out in shock and grief. Never could they have imagined that Nietion would be able to kill Lord 10 Lotus Heads with a single sword strike. Although Lord 10 Lotus Heads was a bit weaker than the 6th and 8th Lotus Heads, he was still a late paramount god. For him to have been killed by a single sword strike from Nietion left the 6th and 8th Lotus Heads completely shocked. When Nietion saw the blood-red light, his eyes widened and his expression stiffened. Never could he have guessed that the sword would be so strong. It was far beyond anything he could have ever imagined. Nietion became cold as he examined his energy. From what he could tell, he was at least as strong as a mid-paramount god. Only someone like that would be able to kill a late paramount god, like Lord 10 Lotus Heads, with a single sword strike. What exactly was the power of the Valyrian barrier? It was so terrifying that it could improve Nietion's strength even more than the 3 forbidden talismans. Most importantly, the power of the Valyrian barrier only existed outside of Nietion. If it entered Nietion's body, Nietion wouldn't be able to handle it. "How could you be so strong, you brat?" Lord 8 Lotus Heads howled, seemingly on the verge of going insane. He could sense that Nietion was only a late Lord God. So how could he possibly have killed a late paramount god like Lord 10 Lotus Heads with a single sword strike? The difference between a Lord God and a paramount god was like the difference between the heavens and the earth. Just what kind of freak was Nietion? It's the rainbow armor on his body. The 6th Lotus Master was still relatively calm as he spoke in a deep voice. However, his eyes were flickering continuously. "You're not that stupid," Nietionling said coldly. "But that doesn't change anything. You're all going to die today." "What arrogance!" Lord 6 Lotus Heads growled. After all, he was a late paramount god, so even in a situation like this, he was able to keep his cool. Old 8, let's attack together, Lord 6 Lotus Heads said, his expression grim. All right, the 8 Lotus Masters agreed. Their auras surged, and a black aura filled the sky. Then, they launched their attacks, and a black aura surged towards Nietian like an ocean. At the same time, Lord 6 Lotus Heads attacked, and the black energy he unleashed was even more terrifying than that of Lord 8 Lotus Heads. Rumble. The power of the 2 Lotus Heads combined to form a black lotus that was even more terrifying than the combined power of the 3 Lotus Heads. Rumbling sounds filled the air as it bore down on Nietian. Nietian's eyes narrowed as he unleashed his sword will, as well as the power of the stars. At the same time, his astral soul armor and astral soul flame appeared. God-slaying strike, world incineration. Nietian let out a bellow and thrust the star heavenly forward. The power of his sword intent and star soul flame instantly burst forth, and a fiery sword that was tens of thousands of meters long appeared. The entire sky was instantly illuminated, as if heaven and earth were on fire. The 6 Lotus Masters and the 8 Lotus Masters sucked in a breath of cold air when they saw this. Their faces were filled with shock. At that moment, they realized that they were no match for Nietian. Rumble. In the next instant, the fiery sword slashed through the air, and the Black Lotus was destroyed by the sword will. The gigantic fiery sword was like a dragon of flames, crashing toward Lord 6 and Lord 8 Lotus Heads. In the blink of an eye, the 2 of them felt the killing intent. They wanted to run, but it was too late.